Muy buenos días. Es un gusto darles la bienvenida a la Feria FAO Transforma, nuestra primera feria de experiencias inspiradoras. Welcome to this FAO Transforms fair. We have simultaneous translation interpretation in the globe in the down part of the screen, so you can choose Spanish, English, or French. Es un gusto darles la bienvenida a nuestra feria y agradecer la presencia de los colegas de FAO y de nuestros socios en esta sesión. Esta feria regional es un espacio donde queremos visibilizar y estimular la gestión del conocimiento y la innovación en la FAO, aprender, compartir e innovar para potenciar una dinámica de colaboración, para contribuir a la transformación hacia sistemas agroalimentarios más eficientes, inclusivos, resilientes y sostenibles en América Latina y el Caribe. Les recordamos que hay interpretación para quienes deseen tomar ventaja de ella al inglés y al francés. Mi nombre es Carolina Trivelli, soy asesora en análisis estratégico de la FAO para América Latina y el Caribe y estaré moderando la jornada de hoy. Tenemos 3 bloques en esta sesión de FAO Transforma. En el primer bloque, para aprender algo nuevo, luego de las palabras de bienvenida de Julio Verdegué, nuestro subdirector y representante regional, y de nuestra científica jefe, tendremos una presentación sobre economía del comportamiento y cómo las ciencias del comportamiento pueden contribuir a mejorar el trabajo que hacemos de manera efectiva y sencilla. Después tenemos un segundo bloque, que es el corazón de esta feria, donde colegas y socios presentarán experiencias inspiradoras. Son 18 presentaciones.
Experiences. We have 18 experiences and exchanges in 5 parallel rooms. We have better production, nutrition, environment, life, and support, where we will be hearing about innovation in this area. Each of the participants in this fair will be able to choose this area. Please remember that there is a different link for each of the rooms, and we will be sharing in the chat. And then we will return to the plenary room and hear about how the partners in the region are considered related to innovation and others for each of the blocks. So we'll have an area for discussion, and we would like you to review the chat or raise the hand to participate. We would like to remind you again that this event has simultaneous interpretation, and it is also in streaming. You can access it through the FAO channel in our site and from our Twitter account and FAO Americas. For those of you that are seeing it through this channel, you can use the top button in the webpage to choose the language in which you would like to hear this session. We would like to invite all of the participants to leave your comments or questions in the Zoom chat, and we would like then to respond. We also want to invite you to comment the event in hashtag FAO Transforms. Please, during the session, for those of you that are in the Zoom session, mute your phone so that we can avoid any type of interruption. We will then open this session with Mr. Julio Verdegué,
Recording in
regional
progress.
representative.
Buenos días, buenas tardes.
Good morning and good afternoon. I'm so pleased to welcome everybody from all of the groups, sessions, organizations, conferences, governments, innovators who have come here today at this first edition of FAO Transforms. By coincidence, we are meeting at a point in time at which member countries of the FAO are together at our council at the headquarters, and they just approved yesterday in Latin America and Caribbean time, a new strategy for science and innovation for FAO. So this is a great time for us to be together at this interesting experience. The FAO strategic framework aims to back up the 2030 agenda through transformation toward more efficient and inclusive and resilient and sustainable agri-food systems. The vision is to attain better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better livelihoods without leaving anybody behind. This agenda focuses on transforming agri-food systems and is absolutely impossible to achieve without an enormous effort in innovation. Technological and scientific innovation, as well as innovation based on ancestral knowledge from our indigenous and Afro-descendant communities that form the backbone of Latin America and the Caribbean. We also have social groups and governance and institutions that all need to be involved. But at the end of the day, it will require an enormous effort in innovation. But I feel optimistic because ever since we started to domesticate animals 10 million years ago, all of our farmers and everybody who belongs to the agri-food system, workers, businesses, transporters, merchants, inventors, scientists, social organizations, they've all been agents of countless innovations, and one of them has been particularly revolutionary. Agri-food systems have long been ailed by problems and fallout that we don't like, that is not good for us or the planet. But the stakeholders of these agri-food systems have always been able to overcome enormous challenges. In our region, for example, in Latin America and the Caribbean, we've got about 20 million fisher people and farmers and livestock breeders and raisers who produce enough food to meet the caloric needs of 1.3 billion people. That's 20 million feeding 1.3 billion. That's enough to feed 17% of the planet's population. It would not be possible for us to eat if these people were not incredibly innovative. And at FAO, we have to do better effort to be up to par on innovation for the people who feed us and up to par with the enormous challenges facing agri-food systems: environmental, climate, socio-demographic, economic challenges. And we are facing them today, and especially at this particularly problematic point in time when we're facing a food crisis. That's why at our recent FAO Regional Conference for LATAM and the Caribbean, which took place end of March, early April in Quito, the name of our organization affirmed that every initiative should be an engine for innovation and every project should be a push for digitalization and innovation. FAO Transform is an important piece of this, or Transforma in Spanish, and it's there to help us improve and support the innovations that our colleagues are carrying out at every corner of the world in the 33 countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. We believe that the best innovations are done in partnership, and we want them to be known beyond the small spaces in which they are developed. some of these innovations are still invisible except for the people who are directly involved in them. And FAO Transform is a chance to scale them up, to scale them out, and of course to improve them. I want to thank my colleagues from FAO who took the time to document their innovations. They're not our innovations. They're innovations in which we have shared with many other people, with social cooperatives, women's groups, indigenous groups, organizations, civil society organizations, etc., and everybody else at this fair. We're working in 12 countries, in Argentina, in Brazil, in Colombia, in Ecuador, El Salvador, Chile, Guatemala, Guyana, Haiti, Mexico, Venezuela, and Uruguay. And we're also working with 2 regional projects, Mas Algodón and Heukit. So if there's something we have learned, it's that innovation is the fruit of collaboration. That's why I especially want to thank our partners at this FAO Transform Fair. We have the Knowledge Works and the Institute for Behavioral Economics, and we're so glad that members of other organizations are here with us at this event. Thank you so much for being here with us, and thank you so much for continuing to gamble on innovation as a mechanism for transformation. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. We will now hear welcoming remarks from our Chief Scientist, Ismahan Nawafi, who could not be here live. He's at the sessions with Mr. Rodriguez, but we're going to hear welcoming remarks through a video.
It is a pleasure to be with you today to provide this keynote address on the opportunities derived from as part of the FAO Transform Inspiring. I'm grateful for the opportunity to important groundbreaking event. As the first stimulate the improved management and innovation in FAO, this event and build on to event, and I'm certain its result will contribute to FAO. Achieving this transformation is a key component of which seeks to support the 2030 agenda through the transformation more resilient and more sustainable agri-food system, better nutrition, better environment, and science, technology, and innovation maximize our efforts in meeting the we are developing FAO first ever science and innovation strategy, which identifies strengthening and innovation in FAO technical intervention, and such opportunity is definitely behavioral science. Of what FAO aspire to achieve, whether upstream with global international partners or and this will be through creating policies that enable agriculture and downstream also with farmers, with other chain actors in production practices and more adoption for technology. This change often relies on discovery, alien of it. Rest in the behavioral increasing potential to facilitate the and institutional required to transform our agri-food system. For example, the ongoing behavioral science into the spotlight gives the need for changes to acknowledge that intention does not always lead to action. New approaches sharing, combating disinformation, and prompting pro-health action, myth-busting chat bots fueled by artificial intelligence, as well as vaccine. This concept could be applied to misinformation of agriculture or to livestock production to reduce disease and the trend. Taking agrarian communities into account, behavioral science has shown how farmers are much more likely to use an innovation when recommended, and the peer-to-peer trust is very important. Agronomists showing the near universal power of social norms to drive often important. Other examples include how placing at eye level increases nutrition, how commitment devices ensure the timely fertilizer action. And we see how fast, particularly seasons, work on this on all supermarkets where all our kids get the sweet right at their eye level. Urge us all to be by. And there has been an outpouring of application of behavioral science to enhance from health tracking and fitness apps to goal by taking the whole human being into account, not just policies. Behavioral science has the potential to significantly from the use of agriculture equipment to socially networked policies schemes. Moreover, by placing behavioral thinking at the center of our practice, we are more likely to be adapted to the users and more likely to on the ground. So as we are creating solutions in mind, how this is going to be perceived by the user. Gentlemen, we live in an incredibly challenging time, but also an exciting time. Ever, since technology and innovation have the potential to make the most complex challenges. Many of these challenges involve behavior and action by stakeholders from all walks of life and across entire value chains and livelihoods. From policymakers in Parliament and most of all ways of acting must shift for agri-food system to achieve the vision of the poor man. Better life. Leveraging behavioral science must be a critical part of that key scientific discipline for FAO to add to innovation. Piloting of behavior science both through the efforts of FAO encouraging and facilitating regional and sub-regional. This is to strengthen scientific dialogue, including English and bringing to bear the foremost science and evidence. And through the Office of Innovation, pilots and scale technologies and innovation better fit for their context. Today, we are pleased to work in that respect to boost the discussion around behavior and to highlight your work piloting this and other cross-country projects and programs. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Unas disculpas para quienes estamos en el Zoom.
Thank you very much, and apologies for those that are in the Zoom. This video will be recorded for those of you that would like to hear it again. We will continue by thanking our chief scientist for her participation, and we will now start with the first conference today, presented by Dr. Steve Wendell. He is Vice President of the Busara Center for Behavioral Economics, where he is the responsible of the technical experience and Busara Center in different regions, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean. Steve has been guiding different initiatives and startups. He is an expert in behavioral sciences and will be letting us know how behavioral science could be a tool and help us for those in FAO can do our work in a better fashion. And Stephen, you have been acknowledged. Thank you for participating today.
Hi, everybody. As Carolee mentioned, I'm Steve Wendell from the Busara Center. We've actually worked with FAO and a variety of organizations for many years, applying behavioral science to common agricultural problems, working with farmers, etc. And it's my joy to share some of those lessons and also just talk about the tremendous opportunity that's facing FAO Latin America and the Caribbean as your scientific lead, and as you had mentioned before, to help amplify the work the FAO is doing with lessons from behavioral science. So can everyone see my slides okay? Is the audio coming through all right?
The audio is okay, but we are not seeing your screen,
Checking.
Steve.
It should be on screen sharing now.
Okay, now it's okay. Now it's perfect.
Okay, great. No problem. Just wanted to double check. Right, so by way of introduction, and my apologies, I'm actually just getting over COVID myself, so sorry if I cough a bit in the middle. I think there are a variety of ways that one can think about applied behavioral science. I think one very useful one is to think about just what's going on in the field right now, which is a tremendous explosion of interest and application all around the world. And we see that just over the last decade, we've seen behavioral science grow from almost nothing to being absolutely central to the operations of major corporations like Walmart, to government institutions, the UK government, the US government, New Zealand, Argentina has a new unit, etc., to increasingly multinational and multilateral organizations like the FAO, like UNICEF, etc. And we see wonderful work that actually was just mentioned in the previous talk of the flowering of this approach. So it's exciting. That's one way of thinking about behavioral science. I want to show you what it actually looks like in practice. So the previous speaker mentioned some of the benefits that have been gained. I thought we'd actually just go through and do it. So, for example, let's say that I know FAO works in a diversity of different areas, working with farmers, working on insurance, working with consumers. But let's say you're working on the school feeding program, which is a really exciting area of FAO's work. And in the school feeding program, what you've been asked is, well, there's a country that brings in a lot of imported foods, carbohydrate heavy, processed foods. People are getting high levels of diabetes in the country. And your job in this example is to try and help change that, to promote local produce among both the school officials and the parents for school feeding programs. And so I'll ask you, what's the first thing that you would do? And I don't know, I know we have some on YouTube, but I know we have quite a few on the chat as well. Feel free just to shoot out a couple different ideas. I didn't know if they warned you that this would be an interactive session, but it is, sorry. So you're working in a country, you said, okay, we have this great school feeding program. We want to promote the use of local produce to make kids healthier. What's the first thing you're going to do? Shoot out some ideas. Let me see if I can see the chat window here. Oops. There we go. Anything in the chat? Okay, we're going to try it interactive. Carolina, if nothing else, I'll call on you. Okay, diagnostic, thank you. And Spanish is fine, by the way. I can read Spanish, just my pronunciation is awful, and I thought I wouldn't entertain everyone by trying to speak Spanish. Survey folks, right? Great, thank you, Christopher. The first thing we often do is, well, we want to do a diagnóstico, do a survey. Identificar oferta and demanda. Great, so look at the supply and demand, see what the likes and preferences. Here we go. Now the ideas are coming through. Awesome. The first thing we do is, well, we look to understand. And we've just used lots of different words for that. But let's say what you find is, as you start to understand, as you start to talk to people in this country, they think, well, local produce, that's what my grandmother ate, right? This imported food from the US, from wherever, that's modern food. That's what you learn, for example. What do you do next? Once you've learned that people have a strong bias, they feel that it's old-fashioned. Listen to the personas. Thank you, Alma. Bring some more. What are some other things you do? So now you understand what's going on. What are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? Okay, listen to personas. I'll wait for a few more responses. Great. Get to know the cultural. I don't know how to translate that. The prices of local goods. Yeah, local goods. The availability of local produce. Try to connect with farmers and schools. Exactly right. You get to know the local markets. What we would call this, right? What you're doing right now is, well, starting to design an intervention, change something you do in that, right? Something that could perhaps help change that perception of local food versus foreign food versus imported food. There's one more step. I'll save the back and forth. I think we've got the idea. Well, after you come up with this idea of getting to know the local markets, seeing what can change in the supply and demand, well, of course, after that, you'd want to see, does it work? Does it actually help people to think differently about local produce, so that the school officials and the parents can then perhaps create an opening, create an opportunity. Thank you, Francisco. Aplicar un prototipo, por ejemplo, right? To try out one of these, to try out a prototype, to try out these examples in practice. That's the idea. That's behavioral problem solving. And what I wanted to show you is that it's something intuitive, and most importantly, it's something that I know many of us are already doing in our work. Now, may not be working on local school feeding programs, right? That was just one example. But rather that when we attack a problem, we realize, hey, there's people involved here. It's something that seems to make sense. It seems like people wouldn't want diabetes. It seems like people they'd want to have local produce. There's an intuitive process that we can use to figure out what's going on, to come up with a potential solution, as well as to go try it out in the field. And that process is the core of applied behavioral science. Now, I'm using the terms that Busara uses, align, just to align with one's stakeholders and see what is really the problem, in this case, local produce. Understand, get into the context, talk to people about it, design an intervention, assess and share, ayudas, that we use at Busara, but there are many different frameworks one can use for this. The core understanding is the same. And what's really different about applied behavioral science isn't that it's so completely foreign than what you might be doing in your job right now, but rather at each of these steps, we have some tools that can help amplify your work, that can make it more powerful. That if you've designed a wonderful crop insurance program for farmers, we can help with these tools, you can help increase the usage of it. That time and energy you put into the program isn't wasted, and people just really get excited about it. And so at each one of these stages, we have a set of tools and lessons. And I'm going to go through a few examples as we walk through, but the most important part is this is something that can be taught, and it's something that isn't completely foreign. It's something you can integrate into your existing practice. And by the way, the example I just gave you, it was actually a project that we're doing right now in Barbados. Now, the analysis that people thought it was something that grandmothers ate, that's not necessarily a Barbados issue, but this is a major issue facing Barbados right now. And it's a project that we've just launched with the IDB. And as it happens, the FAO has done some great work in this field. For example, in Fiji, this is a common problem with with island countries, where imported food replaces local food, shelf-stable, carbohydrate-rich foods causes non-communicable diseases. And as an example of that start-to-finish process, let me show you a project we did actually in Fiji, building on some of this great work. So in this particular case, we're asked by the Australian government and others to, well, help promote local eating. It wasn't particularly a school feeding, but it was more generally local food. And so the first thing we did is exactly what you all were recommending earlier on the understand phase. Go talk to people, understand their lived experience, do qualitative research and see how do they feel about it? What's going on here? Second, we designed a set of interventions. Some of them were about their sense of pride in community, right? As a way of countering this sense of, local food's old, we like the new imported stuff, right? Pride in community can help counter that. We looked at the availability. We looked at the supply and demand, as other people mentioned, right? All of these ideas, you were doing behavioral science. You were doing exactly, in fact, what we did in this project. Very, very similar. They're just some additional tools, again, that we can add to make it even more powerful. And then finally, we assess their impact. And one of the key lessons from behavioral science is people aren't always great at telling you what they're going to do in the future, especially when they know what the right answer is. So if you say, hey, you've just gone through this training program, are you going to eat local food? Of course, people are going to say, yes, I will. But we can't trust them because they may just trying to be pleasing you. And so in this study, one of the techniques from behavioral science is to observe rather than to ask. And so we measured actual food uptake. We had an imported option, we had local food option, and we just watched people to see, did those who went through the program, went through these particular interventions, did they actually choose local food? And the answer is yes, they did. And it was quite impactful, a nice increase in the local food. And it's not a hypothetical. It's not, hey, maybe they might. No, they actually chose to use their scarce resources to get this food right then in that moment, which is great. And one of the things you can also find is dig in and understand who in the population you're helping and who are you not helping. So in this case, it was women who were far more likely to respond to it than men. Did some follow-up studies on why that was the case. Love to talk to you afterwards if you'd like, and I can go into details there. But one of the most interesting things was that it didn't affect preferences. It didn't affect how people felt about the food overall. Rather, it just became a natural expression of their identity and who they were. To help people do something they want to do isn't always to convince them. They may already be on board with you. There may be something else going on in the mind that stops them. That's why this is such a cool example. Let me give you another one real quick. So post-harvest loss, obviously a major problem around the world with many farmers. This particular case comes from a series of experiments in Nigeria to try and decrease post-harvest loss. And just very briefly, well, in this study, well, there was an understanding phase to see what's going on here. Now post-harvest loss is a very complex process, of course. One of the challenges that we realized as part of this study was that the farmers didn't necessarily realize all the many various ways that they were losing their produce before it got to market. Now, this seems like an obvious thing. Everyone would want to be able to sell all of their produce. But yet there are technologies, low toxicity pesticides, machines, different packing mechanisms, et cetera, that can decrease post-harvest loss. And so we're at a quandary. There's something that seems right for farmers, exactly something they would want to do, but isn't being done. So this was one of the understandings we got was, okay, it's too complex. There's other things that they're focusing on, and all of the details of what's going on didn't happen. I see that just now the slides are catching up. Sorry about that. You should now see an understand slide. I just saw on the return that it looks like there's a little bit delay there. So my apologies if it seems a bit odd. So, well, what do you do about that? So we designed a couple different interventions. What you find in behavioral science is they range from very small, light touch ones, like the previous speaker was talking about changing the where food items are placed and which one's right in front of your eye. That's a very light touch. The example on the screen is another light touch intervention, in this case for farmers, showing practically what the post-harvest loss meant for them. Fewer livestock, fewer ability to pay for goods in your services. And this is a very light touch one. We tried another one which builds on a particular cognitive quirk, the way the mind works, which is to show it as rather than this is how much income you could gain, show how much you're losing. Because for many people, that's just a far more powerful way of thinking about it. Like, oh, I don't want to lose money. You don't work as hard as if it's something that you want to gain, which is called loss aversion. Now, there are also, sometimes light touch isn't enough. So we designed some much larger structural changes by, for example, cleverly combining the time when people get their seeds with a post-harvest loss kit. So they don't have to take any extra action. It comes with it. And we bundled in this sense of, hey, this is a free thing you get with it, which many people get excited about, free, myself included. And so we also looked at loan structures. So there are small nudges and there are big structural changes inspired by behavioral science that you can use. Okay. So taking a step back from these examples, I mentioned that there's an intuitive process that you're already using as you confront challenges like this. And we have a set of tools that can help amplify, can help build on what you're doing. For example, in the understand section, as we think about people's behavior, we see one of the lessons from behavioral science is we see again and again that, well, there are things people want to do that's in their best interest, that they really believe in, but they don't follow through with. For me, that's exercise and eating healthy. Sorry. For you, it might be something else. For a farmer, it might be something. For each person, they have different intention action gaps. But in behavioral science, we have ways of thinking about the major obstacles. So for example, as you look across the literature, the major reasons that people don't do something that they say they want to do is, first and foremost, in the moment, they're just not paying attention. They're thinking about their crops, they're thinking about their kids, they're thinking about something else. That's a problem of cueing. Second, they may have an emotional reaction like, oh, that doesn't feel right. Even though the costs and benefits may make a whole lot of sense. That emotional reaction, we've got a whole lot of research on what you can do there. Similarly, there are problems of conscious evaluation. The way people think about costs and benefits, well, they're not like a calculator. And we have standard rules, ways that we can understand how people do that. There's procrastination, there's a sense of self-efficacy, there are a variety of these tools. Most importantly is not that you learn all of these now, but rather it builds on what you do, and it's something that is relatively easy to pick up. You don't need a PhD. I've taught many, many teams myself, from people straight out of college to those who have been long experts in their field. And this is, again, an extra set of tools that can help them be more effective. And in fact, we're actually doing this right now with FAO Rome. So there was, we started off with a training program with some folks led by Courtney Price. I think he may actually be on the call. He's the lead behavioral scientist in the innovation group at FAO Central. And we then followed up with mentoring and support kind of as they actually did projects over time, and that continues to today, where we work through them and applying these methods. A few days training, and then just some support over time, and people are up and running. And in fact, they did it so well that this was presented at the UN Behavioral Summit last week. It's awesome. Here's one of the quotes, and I think that's actually the chief scientist who spoke just now as well, talking about the value of behavioral science. So this is something that FAO overall is adopting, and we're really excited to have been working with you all so far. And so, if I might, just a few quick additional points I wanted to talk about on the design side. Many people, when they first look at behavioral science, they think, oh, it's a magic hat. You could pull out answers of how to change behavior. Honestly, usually what it takes is an expert like you and a mindset to look for these types of behavioral obstacles. Once you have that, usually the solutions are pretty clear. I spend a lot of time in training programs talking with that beginning part, so people know, okay, this is how we align, this is what behavioral science can do. But usually when people are in the details, they're like, oh yeah, okay, I got it, I can figure this out. And you do. Now there are lots of fun tricks. There are things you can build on, but they're not necessary, to be frank. I'm a behavioral scientist. I've done this for over a decade. And what we really need is your expertise combined with the behavioralist perspective. That's where we get the great stuff. Here's a few. Fresh starts on birthdays, anniversaries, start of the year. People are more open to change. Reminders, though annoying, are surprisingly effective. Simple SMS messages have been shown again and again to actually work. Things like when we're working with habits, keeping the same look, but changing what it is people are eating. For example, this actually comes from Mars Wrigley, from their really unhealthy bar to their slightly less unhealthy protein bar. Looks very similar, and that was very intentional, because that's what's called routine replacement in a habit. There are lots of these. I won't bore you with them. Let me just wrap up quickly. What I wanted to get across is that there's an intuitive process that I believe many of you are already using, and I could see from our conversation that we can solve behavioral problems. Behavioral science isn't completely new and different. Rather, they're a set of tools we can add to your repertoire to help amplify your work. This is being done across the world. It's exciting. I'm particularly excited about FAO Central's work, as well as just the flowering of behavioral science across Latin America and the Caribbean right now. It's really the main growth area in the world, and I love it. And I hope that you will reach out to Carolina, reach out to Sarush. They're really leading the charge at FAO in Latin America and the Caribbean with any questions you might have. I'm also happy to help. I wanted to give you a taste of what's possible here, as well as, of course, with the examples the chief scientist gave. It's an exciting field, and I hope to see more wonderful work coming out of the FAO.
Gracias, Steve, por tu presentación.
Thank you so much, Steve, for your presentation.
We have simultaneous interpretation for you in the globe.
We did have the simultaneous interpreting running, so if you want to hear in English, then you're welcome to do that. We have a few minutes for questions or comments. If anybody wants to say anything. I think there's a comment in the chat. It says, if we were to say it in a simplistic manner, we might say that an attitude to change depends on three verbs: knowing, being able to, and wanting. I understand behavioral science focuses more on wanting than on knowing. How does behavioral science also incorporate the being able to, poder, the being able to, verb. How could you answer that?
Behavioral science can really make things happen.
She's repeating the question.
Sorry. So the different. Sorry, it's actually difficult for me to try and translate and understand the nuance there while I was hearing speaking. So sorry. The difference between knowing, doing, and wanting, right?
Yeah.
Maybe explain a little bit. Sorry. I tried switching over the translation, but it didn't work.
Mina, es una pregunta de Mina Namdar. Mina, ¿por qué no prendes tu micro y haces la pregunta? Mina.
¿Sí? ¿Me escuchan?
Sí.
Yes.
Sí, sí,
Yeah,
sí.
I can hear you.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Yes. Hello, Stephen. Thank you very much for your presentation. The attitude with change is related to having people knowing or not knowing certain things or issues, or that people can or cannot, and they're considering the example that you were providing for healthy diets. Not being able to is probably not having the money to purchase these healthy diets that we know are more expensive. And the last aspect is not wanting or believing that it will be good to change. These three pillars, I see that behavioral sciences is more in the desire and the knowledge, but this more structural condition, that means that people sometimes would want to, but is not able to because they don't have the means. So I would like to know how behavioral sciences considers this aspect.
Wonderful. Thank you.
There's also a question in the chat from Sarush that I think you could answer both.
Okay.
Together.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I just got that one. So yes, when you look at an individual consumer who is resource constrained, as we all are, and let's say, for example, that the local produce is more expensive. Yes, behavioral science builds on economics. And I want to be very clear, in the end, incentives matter immensely. And if someone can't afford it, no nudge in the world is going to change that. Now, what we look at is not so much knowledge, and this is where I want to disagree. Is it's not a okay. Let's say it wasn't primarily a financial issue, but people just didn't know about local produce. Often that's not what we look at, because I don't know anybody who doesn't know about local produce, for example. I don't know anybody who doesn't know they should exercise more. I don't know anybody, et cetera, right? Many of the good things in our lives are things that we know about. Maybe we don't know all the technical details, but rather what we see again and again is a gap between intention and action. So it is acción. It is not so much saber that is the problem. That is what we look at. And so we have cognitive quirks that get in our way of someone who really does want to. The quiere is there, but the action is not. That may be they get distracted. That may be that they, it seems foreign to them. And if it just seemed a bit more familiar, an emotional thing, then they could go take action. That's where we see tremendous power. Now, when there is a structural issue, that's why I gave that example of post-harvest loss. Sometimes it is a structural issue. And what you do is you look at who creates that structure. And is there work to be done? Policymakers don't want post-harvest loss any more than anybody else, right? And so how can we apply behavioral science to help remove behavioral obstacles for the policymakers, for the government officials? And so when you face a structural barrier like that, it's rather you shift to the people who are making the structural decisions. It's not that you simply give. It's not that it's irrelevant. It's you look in a different place. Does that speak to your question, Mina? Okay, great. Let me see. Okay, so Rush, I saw you had a question there. It's often the case that we don't start by first understanding the user. Yep, exactly. Instead, it seems to me we often start with developing a goal or an aspirational vision of what we want the state to be, instead of a tool serving our users. Yeah, and you said behavioral science seems to invert that, and I think you're right, except in one caveat there, which is initially behavioral science actually started just about as bad as everybody else, which is behavioral science started with, I want to go change behavior, I want to go increase food use, et cetera, whatever it might be, local food. It's over time that we realized, especially in development work, especially getting out of the academe, saying, no. To really make this effective, to really help people in their lives, we have to stop and be more humble. We have to invert the process. And that's really the flowering of behavioral science we're seeing right now. So I wish we had done that from the beginning, Sarush, but it is certainly the practice now. Listen first, then think of solutions, right? Understand what's going on in people's lives, their context, their situation. Because if there's one key lesson of behavioral science, is the context matters immensely. What's going on? Is it, for one person, it might be an issue of self-identity. For another issue, it might be an issue of finances. For another issue, it might be they don't know where to go to that grocery store, or it may be a habitual purchase, right? Many food behaviors are habitual, meaning there's no conscious thought at all. It has actually very little to do with even supply and demand, very little to do with prices. It's just habit. It's only when there's a severe price shock do we break out of that. And so what we need is a more nuanced look. We need a way to personalize. We need a way to contextualize. And that's where some of the really exciting work is going on right now. So thanks for the question, Sarush.
Gracias.
Okay, I see. Yes, of course.
Gracias, Steve. Ya no tenemos mucho
Thank you, Steve. We do not have too much time left, but on the chat, we have different comments and recommendations for reading, which is very interesting for all of us. We can start getting to know more about behavioral sciences and what this can offer as a tool. But I think that your final comment is related to what Alma was mentioning at the beginning, which is the context. Context is important to get to know people, to get to know the different customs and behaviors. This makes tremendous changes in creating solutions, effective solutions, so that we can really reach the goals that we're proposing. We are very happy to get to know about Busaida's work with participants of FAO, and we want to work more with Busaida within the region from FAO as well. So thank you very much, Steve, for your time, your presentation, and we will be in touch so we can continue working and seeing how behavioral sciences will help us do our work in a better fashion. We now have to leave the plenary room so we can go to the different parallel rooms. As I mentioned earlier, we have 5 parallel rooms. In the chat, you will be seeing or finding the different links. If you do not have them, we have to leave this link here and go to each of the parallel rooms of your choice. In these 5 different rooms, we have 18 inspiring experiences that will be presented by teams of FAO or partners that participate in those areas. We have 1 room for each improvement, as we said, better production, better nutrition, better environment, better life, and a 5th one for better support. I would like to invite you then to leave this room and to go to the room of your choice, and we will return to this plenary room at 12:30 for the final plenary session. You can find in the chat the different links for the room of your choice, and I would like all of you to choose the one that is interesting for you and hear these innovative experiences. All of the rooms will be in the streaming, and you will be able to see them later on for those of you that are not able to participate in their second preferred room. So we will see each other soon in the parallel rooms, and we return at 12:30 Chile time for the final plenary session. Thank you very much, and let us continue with the inspiring experiences of FAO in the parallel rooms.
Naciones Unidas para la Alimentación y la Agricultura, FAO, apunta a ser una institución aún más dinámica en aras de un mundo mejor, que brinda una cooperación técnica sistémica e integral, basada en los nuevos retos que presenta la Agenda 2030 para el Desarrollo Sostenible. La cooperación técnica de la FAO será guiada por el Marco Estratégico para el periodo 2022 al 2031, que se basa en el impulso y las transformaciones al interior de la organización, en particular, las innovaciones institucionales, un nuevo modelo de gestión y una serie de actividades emblemáticas como la iniciativa Mano de la Mano, la digitalización de la agricultura, el impulso a la ciencia y la tecnología aplicada al sector agrícola, el uso de sistemas globales de información abiertos y la transformación de los sistemas agroalimentarios para ser más eficientes, inclusivos, resilientes y sostenibles. De esa forma, pretende contribuir a que los países alcancen todos los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible y, de manera especial, el ODS 1, fin de la pobreza, el ODS 2, hambre cero, el ODS 10, reducción de las desigualdades. El marco estratégico de la FAO plantea 4 mejoras que cuentan con 20 esferas programáticas prioritarias. Una mejor producción, que pretende garantizar modalidades de consumo y producción sostenibles, para lo cual se trabaja en estas esferas programáticas. Innovación verde, para la creación de oportunidades empresariales y comerciales verdes, integradas, que incluyen a los pequeños productores. Transformación azul, para promover sistemas alimentarios acuícolas. Fortalecimiento del concepto de una salud, integrando los sistemas de salud humana y animal. Acceso equitativo de los pequeños productores a los recursos productivos. Y agricultura digital con intención de integrar tecnologías accesibles. Una mejor nutrición, para enfocar sus esfuerzos en promover dietas saludables para todos, nutrición para las personas más vulnerables, alimentos inocuos para todos, reducción de la pérdida y el desperdicio de alimentos, y mercados y comercio transparentes con mayor participación. Un mejor medio ambiente, con programas fortalecidos en sistemas agroalimentarios que mitigan los efectos del cambio climático, bioeconomía para la alimentación y la agricultura sostenibles, y servicios ecosistémicos y biodiversidad en favor de la alimentación y la agricultura, y una vida mejor para todos, con igualdad de género y empoderamiento de las mujeres del medio rural, transformación rural inclusiva, sistemas alimentarios urbanos sostenibles, preparación y respuesta a emergencias agrícolas y sanitarias, sistemas agroalimentarios resilientes, iniciativa Mano de la Mano para la aceleración de la transformación agrícola y el desarrollo rural sostenible, ampliación de las inversiones para transformación de los sistemas agroalimentarios. Para acelerar las mejoras propuestas en el marco estratégico, se prestará especial atención en la cooperación de la FAO, al desarrollo de tecnología, el fomento de la innovación, la amplia gestión de datos y el fortalecimiento de la gobernanza del sector agroalimentario, del capital humano y de las instituciones. Como temas transversales serán abordados la igualdad de género, la juventud y la inclusión. Como lo ha señalado el director general de la FAO, Xu Dongyu, creemos firmemente que la alimentación y la agricultura son la clave para lograr la Agenda 2030 para el desarrollo sostenible y que la agricultura, en particular, es el instrumento más inclusivo para poner fin a la pobreza y lograr que todas las personas gocen de seguridad alimentaria. Estamos convencidos de que con este marco estratégico, los conocimientos especializados únicos y la abundancia de experiencia en materia de desarrollo sostenible, la FAO está bien situada para ayudar a todos los países a lograr los objetivos de la Agenda 2030, sin dejar a nadie atrás.
Innovación y agricultura digital. El sistema alimentario enfrenta desafíos sin precedentes. El mundo está cambiando a un ritmo acelerado debido a la aparición de una enorme variedad de nuevas tecnologías. La FAO ha asumido el desafío de aprovechar la revolución tecnológica en curso para transformar los sistemas alimentarios de América Latina y el Caribe, mejorar su eficiencia y sustentabilidad e impulsar la resiliencia de las comunidades, la agricultura y los ecosistemas al cambio climático. La innovación digital y tecnológica permitirá fomentar la inclusión social y crear oportunidades de empleo en los sistemas alimentarios, particularmente para la juventud rural. América Latina y el Caribe tiene una gran oportunidad para lograr resultados innovadores, tangibles y a gran escala en todos estos frentes. Para aprovecharla, la región necesita desarrollar rápidamente una hoja de ruta de innovación y digitalización de su alimentación y agricultura. La FAO en la región propone centrar su actuar en innovación en 3 grandes prioridades, junto a los países miembros y múltiples socios. La primera es transformar los sistemas alimentarios para lograr dietas saludables para todos, aumentando de manera sostenible la productividad de alimentos frescos y saludables, promoviendo la agricultura sensible a la nutrición al alcance de toda la población, impulsando el comercio electrónico de alimentos frescos y saludables para toda la población, especialmente para los más pobres y vulnerables, y modernizando los centros de suministro y las tiendas minoristas tradicionales gracias a la digitalización. La segunda prioridad es avanzar mano en mano hacia sociedades rurales más prósperas e incluyentes mediante la innovación y la digitalización, promoviendo el cambio tecnológico en los sistemas alimentarios para aumentar la productividad de los empleos rurales, agrícolas y no agrícolas, fomentando la innovación climáticamente inteligente en la producción de alimentos y estimulando el desarrollo territorial en los lugares con altos índices de pobreza e inseguridad alimentaria. La tercera prioridad regional es impulsar una agricultura sostenible y climáticamente resiliente, reduciendo la huella ambiental de la agricultura y los sistemas alimentarios mediante un uso más eficiente de los recursos naturales, conservando la biodiversidad y los servicios ecosistémicos, adaptando la agricultura al cambio climático y reduciendo el riesgo de desastres, e incrementando la eficiencia del uso del agua de la agricultura, el manejo sostenible de la pesca y la gestión y restauración de suelos mediante tecnologías digitales. Llevar adelante este programa de innovaciones tecnológicas, tanto biológicas como digitales, requiere un nuevo entorno político e institucional que garantice que sean adoptadas por la agricultura familiar, la pesca artesanal y por la pequeña y mediana empresa rural, para que se traduzcan en beneficios directos para los sectores vulnerables. Lograrlo significará crear nuevos mecanismos de financiación e inversión e innovaciones institucionales para que los países desarrollen políticas para la ciencia y la tecnología, mejoren su bioseguridad y aumenten sus inversiones públicas en investigación y sus asociaciones a nivel nacional y regional para abordar el desafío de la innovación y la digitalización multilateralmente. La FAO ha creado un nuevo Consejo Digital Internacional para la Alimentación y la Agricultura, que mejorará la cooperación internacional y el intercambio de ideas y experiencias, creando sinergias y evitando la duplicación de esfuerzos. Este consejo se mantendrá al día de los rápidos desarrollos en digitalización, trabajando con nuevas herramientas digitales y con expertos y expertas del más alto nivel. Proporcionará recomendaciones y estrategias de digitalización agrícola a actores gubernamentales y no gubernamentales y fortalecerá la cooperación internacional en los sistemas alimentarios para identificar los desafíos y las posibles soluciones. Todos estamos conscientes de la revolución científica y tecnológica que avanza a nuestro alrededor y de la necesidad que tenemos de reconstruir mejor luego del impacto de la pandemia de COVID-19. Nuestra agricultura, nuestros sistemas alimentarios y nuestras sociedades rurales deben abrazarla y ser parte de ella, como una condición indispensable de su crecimiento y desarrollo en el siglo XXI. FAO asume el compromiso de ser parte de esta tarea.
La agricultura familiar para mí es armonía.
Es pasión.
Es vida.
Es el trabajo asociativo.
La agricultura familiar es un estilo de vida.
La agricultura familiar, sin duda alguna, es el modo de vida para muchísimas familias de nuestro país. Sigue siendo el pilar de la producción.
Buscando la integración con la inclusión del género y la inclusión de jóvenes.
Nosotros nacemos como una huerta familiar, en donde yo me preocupo porque mis hijos, mi esposo y yo comamos algo que realmente sabemos de dónde viene.
Bueno, en la actividad productiva de agricultura familiar está involucrado todo el núcleo familiar.
Tengo un hijo que ya estudió, que ya se preparó y él sabe de innovación y él me da las pautas a seguir. Y lo que contaba mi esposo lo hace.
Aquí es donde se involucra ya la mano de obra de mi esposo, de mi hijo mayor, que él nos ayuda en todo lo que es la parte de desarrollo de máquinas. Y la parte de mi hermana es fundamental con lo que es la distribución de las frutas.
Es no solo la que puede ahora y a futuro sostener la parte alimenticia de la población, sino también seguir siendo la base de la democracia costarricense.
La verdadera agricultura familiar es la distribución de la tierra, la distribución de la riqueza y la generación de riqueza a través de los procesos productivos que en este país hemos venido implementando históricamente.
Es una oportunidad de negocio bastante fuerte en el cual se nos pueden presentar varios escenarios de comercio, y con respecto a lo que es todos los pagos, facturación y todo esto, el PAI es muy ordenado.
Lo que se busca es que las familias puedan generar sus ingresos, su producción, e inclusive en algunas ocasiones ir más allá industrializándolo.
Si uno empieza a enseñarle esto a los niños desde pequeñitos, ya como que planta la semillita en el cerebro de ellos.
Yo tengo una hija que ya ella está exportando, que ella es mi relevo generacional en el área del microlote de café para exportación.
Yo pienso que en el futuro, simplemente cambiamos nuestra forma de pensar en este modelo que tenemos de agricultura en Latinoamérica, podemos ver que los campesinos y los agricultores pueden surgir porque tienen muchísimo potencial.
Los jóvenes van a tener que ver para abajo para ver la agricultura y hacerla exitosa.
La tecnología viene a desarrollarnos, a darnos más fuerza. El desarrollo, la velocidad con la que se produce es otro nivel.
Lo que tenemos que hacer es capacitar a nuestros productores para que puedan accesarla. ¿Qué es lo que tenemos que hacer? Por medio de las instituciones del Estado, capacitar al personal, darle acceso a banda ancha a donde está la infraestructura del productor para que él pueda utilizarla.
Naciones Unidas para la Alimentación y la Agricultura, FAO, apunta a ser una institución aún más dinámica en aras de un mundo mejor, que brinde una cooperación técnica sistémica e integral, basada en los nuevos retos que presenta la Agenda 2030 para el Desarrollo Sostenible. La cooperación técnica de la FAO será guiada por el Marco Estratégico para el periodo 2022 al 2031, que se basa en el impulso y las transformaciones al interior de la organización, en particular, las innovaciones institucionales, un nuevo modelo de gestión y una serie de actividades emblemáticas como la iniciativa Mano de la Mano, la digitalización de la agricultura, el impulso a la ciencia y la tecnología aplicada al sector agrícola, el uso de sistemas globales de información abiertos y la transformación de los sistemas agroalimentarios para ser más eficientes, inclusivos, resilientes y sostenibles. De esa forma, pretende contribuir a que los países alcancen todos los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible y, de manera especial, el ODS 1, fin de la pobreza, el ODS 2, hambre cero, el ODS 10, reducción de las desigualdades. El marco estratégico de la FAO plantea 4 mejoras que cuentan con 20 esferas programáticas prioritarias. Una mejor producción, que pretende garantizar modalidades de consumo y producción sostenibles, para lo cual se trabaja en estas esferas programáticas. Innovación verde, para la creación de oportunidades empresariales y comerciales verdes, integradas, que incluyen a los pequeños productores. Transformación azul, para promover sistemas alimentarios acuícolas. Fortalecimiento del concepto de una salud, integrando los sistemas de salud humana y animal. Acceso equitativo de los pequeños productores a los recursos productivos. Y agricultura digital con intención de integrar tecnologías accesibles. Una mejor nutrición, para enfocar sus esfuerzos en promover dietas saludables para todos, nutrición para las personas más vulnerables, alimentos inocuos para todos, reducción de la pérdida y el desperdicio de alimentos, y mercados y comercio transparentes con mayor participación. Un mejor medio ambiente, con programas fortalecidos en sistemas agroalimentarios que mitigan los efectos del cambio climático, bioeconomía para la alimentación y la agricultura sostenibles, y servicios ecosistémicos y biodiversidad en favor de la alimentación y la agricultura, y una vida mejor para todos, con igualdad de género y empoderamiento de las mujeres del medio rural, transformación rural inclusiva, sistemas alimentarios urbanos sostenibles, preparación y respuesta a emergencias agrícolas y sanitarias, sistemas agroalimentarios resilientes, iniciativa Mano de la Mano para la aceleración de la transformación agrícola y el desarrollo rural sostenible, ampliación de las inversiones para transformación de los sistemas agroalimentarios. Para acelerar las mejoras propuestas en el marco estratégico, se prestará especial atención en la cooperación de la FAO, al desarrollo de tecnología, el fomento de la innovación, la amplia gestión de datos y el fortalecimiento de la gobernanza del sector agroalimentario, del capital humano y de las instituciones, Como temas transversales serán abordados la igualdad de género, la juventud y la inclusión. Como lo ha señalado el director general de la FAO, Xu Dongyu, creemos firmemente que la alimentación y la agricultura son la clave para lograr la Agenda 2030 para el desarrollo sostenible y que la agricultura, en particular, es el instrumento más inclusivo para poner fin a la pobreza y lograr que todas las personas gocen de seguridad alimentaria. Estamos convencidos de que con este marco estratégico, los conocimientos especializados únicos y la abundancia de experiencia en materia de desarrollo sostenible, la FAO está bien situada para ayudar a todos los países a lograr los objetivos de la Agenda 2030, sin dejar a nadie atrás.
Innovación y agricultura digital. El sistema alimentario enfrenta desafíos sin precedentes. El mundo está cambiando a un ritmo acelerado debido a la aparición de una enorme variedad de nuevas tecnologías. La FAO ha asumido el desafío de aprovechar la revolución tecnológica en curso para transformar los sistemas alimentarios de América Latina y el Caribe, mejorar su eficiencia y sustentabilidad e impulsar la resiliencia de las comunidades, la agricultura y los ecosistemas al cambio climático. La innovación digital y tecnológica permitirá fomentar la inclusión social y crear oportunidades de empleo en los sistemas alimentarios, particularmente para la juventud rural. América Latina y el Caribe tiene una gran oportunidad para lograr resultados innovadores, tangibles y a gran escala en todos estos frentes. Para aprovecharla, la región necesita desarrollar rápidamente una hoja de ruta de innovación y digitalización de su alimentación y agricultura. La FAO en la región propone centrar su actuar en innovación en 3 grandes prioridades, junto a los países miembros y múltiples socios. La primera es transformar los sistemas alimentarios para lograr dietas saludables para todos, aumentando de manera sostenible la productividad de alimentos frescos y saludables, promoviendo la agricultura sensible a la nutrición al alcance de toda la población, impulsando el comercio electrónico de alimentos frescos y saludables para toda la población, especialmente para los más pobres y vulnerables, y modernizando los centros de suministro y las tiendas minoristas tradicionales gracias a la digitalización. La segunda prioridad es avanzar mano en mano hacia sociedades rurales más prósperas e incluyentes mediante la innovación y la digitalización, promoviendo el cambio tecnológico en los sistemas alimentarios para aumentar la productividad de los empleos rurales, agrícolas y no agrícolas, fomentando la innovación climáticamente inteligente en la producción de alimentos y estimulando el desarrollo territorial en los lugares con altos índices de pobreza e inseguridad alimentaria. La tercera prioridad regional es impulsar una agricultura sostenible y climáticamente resiliente, reduciendo la huella ambiental de la agricultura y los sistemas alimentarios mediante un uso más eficiente de los recursos naturales, conservando la biodiversidad y los servicios ecosistémicos, adaptando la agricultura al cambio climático y reduciendo el riesgo de desastres, e incrementando la eficiencia del uso del agua de la agricultura, el manejo sostenible de la pesca y la gestión y restauración de suelos mediante tecnologías digitales. Llevar adelante este programa de innovaciones tecnológicas, tanto biológicas como digitales, requiere un nuevo entorno político e institucional que garantice que sean adoptadas por la agricultura familiar, la pesca artesanal y por la pequeña y mediana empresa rural, para que se traduzcan en beneficios directos para los sectores vulnerables. Lograrlo significará crear nuevos mecanismos de financiación e inversión e innovaciones institucionales para que los países desarrollen políticas para la ciencia y la tecnología, mejoren su bioseguridad y aumenten sus inversiones públicas en investigación y sus asociaciones a nivel nacional y regional para abordar el desafío de la innovación y la digitalización multilateralmente. La FAO ha creado un nuevo Consejo Digital Internacional para la Alimentación y la Agricultura, que mejorará la cooperación internacional y el intercambio de ideas y experiencias, creando sinergias y evitando la duplicación de esfuerzos. Este consejo se mantendrá al día de los rápidos desarrollos en digitalización, trabajando con nuevas herramientas digitales y con expertos y expertas del más alto nivel. Proporcionará recomendaciones y estrategias de digitalización agrícola a actores gubernamentales y no gubernamentales y fortalecerá la cooperación internacional en los sistemas alimentarios para identificar los desafíos y las posibles soluciones. Todos estamos conscientes de la revolución científica y tecnológica que avanza a nuestro alrededor y de la necesidad que tenemos de reconstruir mejor luego del impacto de la pandemia de COVID-19. Nuestra agricultura, nuestros sistemas alimentarios y nuestras sociedades rurales deben abrazarla y ser parte de ella, como una condición indispensable de su crecimiento y desarrollo en el siglo XXI. FAO asume el compromiso de ser parte de esta tarea.
La agricultura familiar para mí es armonía.
Es pasión.
Es vida.
Es el trabajo asociativo.
La agricultura familiar es un estilo de vida.
La agricultura familiar, sin duda alguna, es el modo de vida para muchísimas familias de nuestro país. Sigue siendo el pilar de la producción.
Buscando la integración con la inclusión del género y la inclusión de jóvenes.
Nosotros nacemos como una huerta familiar, en donde yo me preocupo porque mis hijos, mi esposo y yo comamos algo que realmente sabemos de dónde viene.
Bueno, en la actividad productiva de agricultura familiar está involucrado todo el núcleo familiar.
Tengo un hijo que ya estudió, que ya se preparó y él sabe de innovación y él me da las pautas a seguir. Y lo que contaba, mi esposo lo hace.
Aquí es donde se involucra ya la mano de obra de mi esposo, de mi hijo mayor, que él nos ayuda en todo lo que es la parte de desarrollo de máquinas. Y la parte de mi hermana es fundamental con lo que es la distribución de las rutas.
Es no solo la que puede ahora y a futuro sostener la parte alimenticia de la población, sino también seguir siendo la base de la democracia costarricense.
La verdadera agricultura familiar es la distribución de la tierra, la distribución de la riqueza y la generación de riqueza a través de los procesos productivos que en este país hemos venido implementando históricamente.
Es una oportunidad de negocio bastante fuerte en el cual se nos pueden presentar varios escenarios de comercio, y con respecto a lo que es todos los pagos, facturación y todo esto, el PAI es muy ordenado.
Lo que se busca es que las familias puedan generar sus ingresos, su producción, e inclusive en algunas ocasiones ir más allá, industrializándolo.
Si uno empieza a enseñarle esto a los niños desde pequeñitos, ya como que planta la semillita en el cerebro de ellos.
Yo tengo una hija que ya ella está exportando, que ella es mi relevo generacional en el área del microlote de café para exportación.
Yo pienso que en el futuro, simplemente cambiamos nuestra forma de pensar en este modelo que tenemos de agricultura en Latinoamérica, podemos ver que los campesinos y los agricultores pueden surgir porque tienen muchísimo potencial.
Los jóvenes van a tener que ver para abajo para ver la agricultura y hacerla exitosa.
La tecnología viene a desarrollarnos, a darnos más fuerza. El desarrollo, la velocidad con la que se produce es otro nivel.
Lo que tenemos que hacer es capacitar a nuestros productores para que puedan accesarla. ¿Qué es lo que tenemos que hacer? Por medio de las instituciones del Estado, capacitar al personal, darle acceso a banda ancha a donde está la infraestructura del productor para que él pueda utilizarla.
Naciones Unidas para la Alimentación y la Agricultura, FAO, apunta a ser una institución aún más dinámica en aras de un mundo mejor, que brinde una cooperación técnica sistémica e integral, basada en los nuevos retos que presenta la Agenda 2030 para el Desarrollo Sostenible. La cooperación técnica de la FAO será guiada por el Marco Estratégico para el periodo 2022 al 2031, que se basa en el impulso y las transformaciones al interior de la organización, en particular, las innovaciones institucionales, un nuevo modelo de gestión y una serie de actividades emblemáticas como la iniciativa Mano de la Mano, la digitalización de la agricultura, el impulso a la ciencia y la tecnología aplicada al sector agrícola, el uso de sistemas globales de información abiertos y la transformación de los sistemas agroalimentarios para ser más eficientes, inclusivos, resilientes y sostenibles. De esa forma, pretende contribuir a que los países alcancen todos los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible y, de manera especial, el ODS 1, fin de la pobreza, el ODS 2, hambre cero, el ODS 10, reducción de las desigualdades. El marco estratégico de la FAO plantea 4 mejoras que cuentan con 20 esferas programáticas prioritarias. Una mejor producción, que pretende garantizar modalidades de consumo y producción sostenibles, para lo cual se trabaja en estas esferas programáticas. Innovación verde, para la creación de oportunidades empresariales y comerciales verdes, integradas, que incluyen a los pequeños productores. Transformación azul, para promover sistemas alimentarios acuícolas. Fortalecimiento del concepto de una salud, integrando los sistemas de salud humana y animal. Acceso equitativo de los pequeños productores a los recursos productivos. Y agricultura digital con intención de integrar tecnologías accesibles. Una mejor nutrición, para enfocar sus esfuerzos en promover dietas saludables para todos, nutrición para las personas más vulnerables, alimentos inocuos para todos, reducción de la pérdida y el desperdicio de alimentos, y mercados y comercio transparentes con mayor participación. Un mejor medio ambiente, con programas fortalecidos en sistemas agroalimentarios que mitigan los efectos del cambio climático, bioeconomía para la alimentación y la agricultura sostenibles, y servicios ecosistémicos y biodiversidad en favor de la alimentación y la agricultura, y una vida mejor para todos, con igualdad de género y empoderamiento de las mujeres del medio rural, transformación rural inclusiva, sistemas alimentarios urbanos sostenibles, preparación y respuesta a emergencias agrícolas y sanitarias, sistemas agroalimentarios resilientes, iniciativa Mano de la Mano para la aceleración de la transformación agrícola y el desarrollo rural sostenible, ampliación de las inversiones para transformación de los sistemas agroalimentarios. Para acelerar las mejoras propuestas en el marco estratégico, se prestará especial atención en la cooperación de la FAO, al desarrollo de tecnología, el fomento de la innovación, la amplia gestión de datos y el fortalecimiento de la gobernanza del sector agroalimentario, del capital humano y de las instituciones. Como temas transversales serán abordados la igualdad de género, la juventud y la inclusión. Como lo ha señalado el director general de la FAO, Xu Dongyu, creemos firmemente que la alimentación y la agricultura son la clave para lograr la Agenda 2030 para el desarrollo sostenible y que la agricultura, en particular, es el instrumento más inclusivo para poner fin a la pobreza y lograr que todas las personas gocen de seguridad alimentaria. Estamos convencidos de que con este marco estratégico, los conocimientos especializados únicos y la abundancia de experiencia en materia de desarrollo sostenible, la FAO está bien situada para ayudar a todos los países a lograr los objetivos de la Agenda 2030, sin dejar a nadie atrás.
Innovación y agricultura digital. El sistema alimentario enfrenta desafíos sin precedentes. El mundo está cambiando a un ritmo acelerado debido a la aparición de una enorme variedad de nuevas tecnologías. La FAO ha asumido el desafío de aprovechar la revolución tecnológica en curso para transformar los sistemas alimentarios de América Latina y el Caribe, mejorar su eficiencia y sustentabilidad e impulsar la resiliencia de las comunidades, la agricultura y los ecosistemas al cambio climático. La innovación digital y tecnológica permitirá fomentar la inclusión social y crear oportunidades de empleo en los sistemas alimentarios, particularmente para la juventud rural. América Latina y el Caribe tiene una gran oportunidad para lograr resultados innovadores, tangibles y a gran escala en todos estos frentes. Para aprovecharla, la región necesita desarrollar rápidamente una hoja de ruta de innovación y digitalización de su alimentación y agricultura. La FAO en la región propone centrar su actuar en innovación en 3 grandes prioridades, junto a los países miembros y múltiples socios. La primera es transformar los sistemas alimentarios para lograr dietas saludables para todos, aumentando de manera sostenible la productividad de alimentos frescos y saludables, promoviendo la agricultura sensible a la nutrición al alcance de toda la población, impulsando el comercio electrónico de alimentos frescos y saludables para toda la población, especialmente para los más pobres y vulnerables, y modernizando los centros de suministro y las tiendas minoristas tradicionales gracias a la digitalización. La segunda prioridad es avanzar mano en mano hacia sociedades rurales más prósperas e incluyentes mediante la innovación y la digitalización, promoviendo el cambio tecnológico en los sistemas alimentarios para aumentar la productividad de los empleos rurales, agrícolas y no agrícolas, fomentando la innovación climáticamente inteligente en la producción de alimentos y estimulando el desarrollo territorial en los lugares con altos índices de pobreza e inseguridad alimentaria. La tercera prioridad regional es impulsar una agricultura sostenible y climáticamente resiliente, reduciendo la huella ambiental de la agricultura y los sistemas alimentarios mediante un uso más eficiente de los recursos naturales, conservando la biodiversidad y los servicios ecosistémicos, adaptando la agricultura al cambio climático y reduciendo el riesgo de desastres, e incrementando la eficiencia del uso del agua de la agricultura, el manejo sostenible de la pesca y la gestión y restauración de suelos mediante tecnologías digitales. Llevar adelante este programa de innovaciones tecnológicas, tanto biológicas como digitales, requiere un nuevo entorno político e institucional que garantice que sean adoptadas por la agricultura familiar, la pesca artesanal y por la pequeña y mediana empresa rural, para que se traduzcan en beneficios directos para los sectores vulnerables. Lograrlo significará crear nuevos mecanismos de financiación e inversión e innovaciones institucionales para que los países desarrollen políticas para la ciencia y la tecnología, mejoren su bioseguridad y aumenten sus inversiones públicas en investigación y sus asociaciones a nivel nacional y regional para abordar el desafío de la innovación y la digitalización multilateralmente. La FAO ha creado un nuevo Consejo Digital Internacional para la Alimentación y la Agricultura, que mejorará la cooperación internacional y el intercambio de ideas y experiencias, creando sinergias y evitando la duplicación de esfuerzos. Este consejo se mantendrá al día de los rápidos desarrollos en digitalización, trabajando con nuevas herramientas digitales y con expertos y expertas del más alto nivel. Proporcionará recomendaciones y estrategias de digitalización agrícola a actores gubernamentales y no gubernamentales y fortalecerá la cooperación internacional en los sistemas alimentarios para identificar los desafíos y las posibles soluciones. Todos estamos conscientes de la revolución científica y tecnológica que avanza a nuestro alrededor y de la necesidad que tenemos de reconstruir mejor luego del impacto de la pandemia de COVID-19. Nuestra agricultura, nuestros sistemas alimentarios y nuestras sociedades rurales deben abrazarla y ser parte de ella, como una condición indispensable de su crecimiento y desarrollo en el siglo XXI. FAO asume el compromiso de ser parte de esta tarea.
La agricultura familiar para mí es armonía.
Es pasión.
Es vida.
Es el trabajo asociativo.
La agricultura familiar es un estilo de vida.
La agricultura familiar, sin duda alguna, es el modo de vida para muchísimas familias de nuestro país. Sigue siendo el pilar de la producción.
Buscando la integración con la inclusión del género y la inclusión de jóvenes.
Nosotros nacemos como una huerta familiar, en donde yo me preocupo porque mis hijos, mi esposo y yo comamos algo que realmente sabemos de dónde viene.
Bueno, en la actividad productiva de agricultura familiar está involucrado todo el núcleo familiar.
Tengo un hijo que ya estudió, que ya se preparó y él sabe de innovación y él me da las pautas a seguir. Y lo que contaba, mi esposo lo hace.
Aquí es donde se involucra ya la mano de obra de mi esposo, de mi hijo mayor, que él nos ayuda en todo lo que es la parte de desarrollo de máquinas. Y la parte de mi hermana es fundamental con lo que es la distribución de las frutas.
Es no solo la que puede ahora y a futuro sostener la parte alimenticia de la población, sino también seguir siendo la base de la democracia costarricense.
La verdadera agricultura familiar es la distribución de la tierra, la distribución de la riqueza y la generación de riqueza a través de los procesos productivos que en este país hemos venido implementando históricamente.
Es una oportunidad de negocio bastante fuerte en el cual se nos pueden presentar varios escenarios de comercio, y con respecto a lo que es todos los pagos, facturación y todo esto, el PAI es muy ordenado.
Lo que se busca es que las familias puedan generar sus ingresos, su producción, e inclusive en algunas ocasiones ir más allá industrializándolo.
Si uno empieza a enseñarle esto a los niños desde pequeñitos, ya como que planta la semillita en el cerebro de ellos.
Yo tengo una hija que ya ella está exportando, que ella es mi relevo generacional en el área del microlote de café para exportación.
Yo pienso que en el futuro, simplemente cambiamos nuestra forma de pensar en este modelo que tenemos de agricultura en Latinoamérica, podemos ver que los campesinos y los agricultores pueden surgir porque tienen muchísimo potencial.
Los jóvenes van a tener que ver para abajo para ver la agricultura y hacerla exitosa.
La tecnología viene a desarrollarnos, a darnos más fuerza. El desarrollo, la velocidad con la que se produce es otro nivel.
Lo que tenemos que hacer es capacitar a nuestros productores para que puedan accesarla. ¿Qué es lo que tenemos que hacer? Por medio de las instituciones del Estado, capacitar al personal, darle acceso a banda ancha a donde está la infraestructura del productor para que él pueda utilizarla.
Naciones Unidas para la Alimentación y la Agricultura, FAO, apunta a ser una institución aún más dinámica en aras de un mundo mejor, que brinde una cooperación técnica sistémica e integral, basada en los nuevos retos que presenta la Agenda 2030 para el Desarrollo Sostenible. La cooperación técnica de la FAO será guiada por el Marco Estratégico para el periodo 2022 al 2031, que se basa en el impulso y las transformaciones al interior de la organización, en particular, las innovaciones institucionales, un nuevo modelo de gestión y una serie de actividades emblemáticas como la iniciativa Mano de la Mano, la digitalización de la agricultura, el impulso a la ciencia y la tecnología aplicada al sector agrícola, el uso de sistemas globales de información abiertos y la transformación de los sistemas agroalimentarios para ser más eficientes, inclusivos, resilientes y sostenibles. De esa forma, pretende contribuir a que los países alcancen todos los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible y, de manera especial, el ODS 1, fin de la pobreza, el ODS 2, hambre cero, el ODS 10, reducción de las desigualdades. El marco estratégico de la FAO plantea 4 mejoras que cuentan con 20 esferas programáticas prioritarias. Una mejor producción, que pretende garantizar modalidades de consumo y producción sostenibles, para lo cual se trabaja en estas esferas programáticas. Innovación verde, para la creación de oportunidades empresariales y comerciales verdes, integradas, que incluyen a los pequeños productores. Transformación azul, para promover sistemas alimentarios acuícolas. Fortalecimiento del concepto de una salud, integrando los sistemas de salud humana y animal. Acceso equitativo de los pequeños productores a los recursos productivos. Y agricultura digital con intención de integrar tecnologías accesibles. Una mejor nutrición, para enfocar sus esfuerzos en promover dietas saludables para todos, nutrición para las personas más vulnerables, alimentos inocuos para todos, reducción de la pérdida y el desperdicio de alimentos, y mercados y comercio transparentes con mayor participación. Un mejor medio ambiente, con programas fortalecidos en sistemas agroalimentarios que mitigan los efectos del cambio climático, bioeconomía para la alimentación y la agricultura sostenibles, y servicios ecosistémicos y biodiversidad en favor de la alimentación y la agricultura, y una vida mejor para todos, con igualdad de género y empoderamiento de las mujeres del medio rural. Transformación rural inclusiva, sistemas alimentarios urbanos sostenibles, preparación y respuesta a emergencias agrícolas y sanitarias, sistemas agroalimentarios resilientes, iniciativa Mano de la Mano para la aceleración de la transformación agrícola y el desarrollo rural sostenible, ampliación de las inversiones para transformación de los sistemas agroalimentarios. Para acelerar las mejoras propuestas en el marco estratégico, se prestará especial atención en la cooperación de la FAO, al desarrollo de tecnología, el fomento de la innovación, la amplia gestión de datos y el fortalecimiento de la gobernanza del sector agroalimentario, del capital humano y de las instituciones. Como temas transversales serán abordados la igualdad de género, la juventud y la inclusión. Como lo ha señalado el director general de la FAO, Xu Dongyu, creemos firmemente que la alimentación y la agricultura son la clave para lograr la Agenda 2030 para el desarrollo sostenible y que la agricultura, en particular, es el instrumento más inclusivo para poner fin a la pobreza y lograr que todas las personas gocen de seguridad alimentaria. Estamos convencidos de que con este marco estratégico, los conocimientos especializados únicos y la abundancia de experiencia en materia de desarrollo sostenible, la FAO está bien situada para ayudar a todos los países a lograr los objetivos de la Agenda 2030, sin dejar a nadie atrás.
innovación y agricultura digital. El sistema alimentario enfrenta desafíos sin precedentes. El mundo está cambiando a un ritmo acelerado debido a la aparición de una enorme variedad de nuevas tecnologías. La FAO ha asumido el desafío de aprovechar la revolución tecnológica en curso para transformar los sistemas alimentarios de América Latina y el Caribe, mejorar su eficiencia y sustentabilidad e impulsar la resiliencia de las comunidades, la agricultura y los ecosistemas al cambio climático. La innovación digital y tecnológica permitirá fomentar la inclusión social y crear oportunidades de empleo en los sistemas alimentarios, particularmente para la juventud rural. América Latina y el Caribe tiene una gran oportunidad para lograr resultados innovadores, tangibles y a gran escala en todos estos frentes. Para aprovecharla, la región necesita desarrollar rápidamente una hoja de ruta de innovación y digitalización de su alimentación y agricultura. La FAO en la región propone centrar su actuar en innovación en 3 grandes prioridades, junto a los países miembros y múltiples socios. La primera es transformar los sistemas alimentarios para lograr dietas saludables para todos, aumentando de manera sostenible la productividad de alimentos frescos y saludables, promoviendo la agricultura sensible a la nutrición al alcance de toda la población, impulsando el comercio electrónico de alimentos frescos y saludables para toda la población, especialmente para los más pobres y vulnerables, y modernizando los centros de suministro y las tiendas minoristas tradicionales gracias a la digitalización. La segunda prioridad es avanzar mano en mano hacia sociedades rurales más prósperas e incluyentes mediante la innovación y la digitalización, promoviendo el cambio tecnológico en los sistemas alimentarios para aumentar la productividad de los empleos rurales, agrícolas y no agrícolas, fomentando la innovación climáticamente inteligente en la producción de alimentos y estimulando el desarrollo territorial en los lugares con altos índices de pobreza e inseguridad alimentaria. La tercera prioridad regional es impulsar una agricultura sostenible y climáticamente resiliente, reduciendo la huella ambiental de la agricultura y los sistemas alimentarios mediante un uso más eficiente de los recursos naturales, conservando la biodiversidad y los servicios ecosistémicos, adaptando la agricultura al cambio climático y reduciendo el riesgo de desastres, e incrementando la eficiencia del uso del agua de la agricultura, el manejo sostenible de la pesca y la gestión y restauración de suelos mediante tecnologías digitales. Llevar adelante este programa de innovaciones tecnológicas, tanto biológicas como digitales, requiere un nuevo entorno político e institucional que garantice que sean adoptadas por la agricultura familiar, la pesca artesanal y por la pequeña y mediana empresa rural, para que se traduzcan en beneficios directos para los sectores vulnerables. Lograrlo significará crear nuevos mecanismos de financiación e inversión e innovaciones institucionales para que los países desarrollen políticas para la ciencia y la tecnología, mejoren su bioseguridad y aumenten sus inversiones públicas en investigación y sus asociaciones a nivel nacional y regional para abordar el desafío de la innovación y la digitalización multilateralmente. La FAO ha creado un nuevo Consejo Digital Internacional para la Alimentación y la Agricultura, que mejorará la cooperación internacional y el intercambio de ideas y experiencias, creando sinergias y evitando la duplicación de esfuerzos. Este consejo se mantendrá al día de los rápidos desarrollos en digitalización, trabajando con nuevas herramientas digitales y con expertos y expertas del más alto nivel. Proporcionará recomendaciones y estrategias de digitalización agrícola a actores gubernamentales y no gubernamentales y fortalecerá la cooperación internacional en los sistemas alimentarios para identificar los desafíos y las posibles soluciones. Todos estamos conscientes de la revolución científica y tecnológica que avanza a nuestro alrededor y de la necesidad que tenemos de reconstruir mejor luego del impacto de la pandemia de COVID-19. Nuestra agricultura, nuestros sistemas alimentarios y nuestras sociedades rurales deben abrazarla y ser parte de ella como una condición indispensable de su crecimiento y desarrollo en el siglo XXI. FAO asume el compromiso de ser parte de esta tarea.
La agricultura familiar para mí es armonía.
Es pasión.
Es vida.
Es el trabajo asociativo.
La agricultura familiar es un estilo de vida.
La agricultura familiar, sin duda alguna, es el modo de vida para muchísimas familias de nuestro país sigue siendo el pilar de la producción.
Buscando la integración con la inclusión del género y la inclusión de jóvenes.
Nosotros nacemos como una huerta familiar, en donde yo me preocupo porque mis hijos, mi esposo y yo comamos algo que realmente sabemos de dónde viene.
Bueno, en la actividad productiva de agricultura familiar está involucrado todo el núcleo familiar.
Tengo un hijo que ya estudió, que ya se preparó y él sabe de innovación y él me da las pautas a seguir. Y lo que contaba mi esposo lo hace.
Aquí es donde se involucra ya la mano de obra de mi esposo, de mi hijo mayor, que él nos ayuda en todo lo que es la parte de desarrollo de máquinas. Y la parte de mi hermana es fundamental con lo que es la distribución de las rutas.
Es no solo la que puede ahora y a futuro sostener la parte alimenticia de la población, sino también seguir siendo la base de la democracia costarricense.
La verdadera agricultura familiar es la distribución de la tierra, la distribución de la riqueza y la generación de riqueza a través de los procesos productivos que en este país hemos venido implementando históricamente.
Es una oportunidad de negocio bastante fuerte en el cual se nos pueden presentar varios escenarios de comercio, y con respecto a lo que es todos los pagos, facturación y todo esto, el PAI es muy ordenado.
Lo que se busca es que las familias puedan generar sus ingresos, su producción, e inclusive en algunas ocasiones ir más allá, industrializándolo.
Si uno empieza a enseñarle esto a los niños desde pequeñitos, ya como que planta la semillita en el cerebro de ellos.
Yo tengo una hija que ya ella está exportando, que ella es mi relevo generacional en el área del microlote de café para exportación.
Yo pienso que en el futuro simplemente cambiamos nuestra forma de pensar en este modelo que tenemos de agricultura en Latinoamérica. Podemos ver que los campesinos y los agricultores pueden surgir porque tienen muchísimo potencial.
Los jóvenes van a tener que ver para abajo para ver la agricultura y hacerla exitosa.
La tecnología viene a desarrollarnos, a darnos más fuerza. El desarrollo, la velocidad con la que se produce es otro nivel.
Lo que tenemos que hacer es capacitar a nuestros productores para que puedan accesarla. ¿Qué es lo que tenemos que hacer? Por medio de las instituciones del Estado, capacitar al personal, darle acceso a banda ancha a donde está la infraestructura del productor para que él pueda utilizarla.
Naciones Unidas para la Alimentación y la Agricultura, FAO, apunta a ser una institución aún más dinámica en aras de un mundo mejor, que brinda una cooperación técnica sistémica e integral, basada en los nuevos retos que presenta la Agenda 2030 para el Desarrollo Sostenible. La cooperación técnica de la FAO será guiada por el Marco Estratégico para el periodo 2022 al 2031, que se basa en el impulso y las transformaciones al interior de la organización, en particular, las innovaciones institucionales, un nuevo modelo de gestión y una serie de actividades emblemáticas como la iniciativa Mano de la Mano, la digitalización de la agricultura, el impulso a la ciencia y la tecnología aplicada al sector agrícola, el uso de sistemas globales de información abiertos y la transformación de los sistemas agroalimentarios para ser más eficientes, inclusivos, resilientes y sostenibles. De esa forma, pretende contribuir a que los países alcancen todos los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible y, de manera especial, el ODS 1, fin de la pobreza, el ODS 2, hambre cero, el ODS 10, reducción de las desigualdades. El marco estratégico de la FAO plantea 4 mejoras que cuentan con 20 esferas programáticas prioritarias. una mejor producción, que pretende garantizar modalidades de consumo y producción sostenibles, para lo cual se trabaja en estas esferas programáticas. Innovación verde, para la creación de oportunidades empresariales y comerciales verdes, integradas, que incluyen a los pequeños productores. Transformación azul, para promover sistemas alimentarios acuícolas. Fortalecimiento del concepto de una salud, integrando los sistemas de salud humana y animal. Acceso equitativo de los pequeños productores a los recursos productivos. Y agricultura digital con intención de integrar tecnologías accesibles. Una mejor nutrición, para enfocar sus esfuerzos en promover dietas saludables para todos, nutrición para las personas más vulnerables, alimentos inocuos para todos, reducción de la pérdida y el desperdicio de alimentos, y mercados y comercio transparentes con mayor participación. Un mejor medio ambiente, con programas fortalecidos en sistemas agroalimentarios que mitigan los efectos del cambio climático, bioeconomía para la alimentación y la agricultura sostenibles, y servicios ecosistémicos y biodiversidad en favor de la alimentación y la agricultura, y una vida mejor para todos, con igualdad de género y empoderamiento de las mujeres del medio rural, transformación rural inclusiva, sistemas alimentarios urbanos sostenibles, preparación y respuesta a emergencias agrícolas y sanitarias, sistemas agroalimentarios resilientes, iniciativa Mano de la Mano para la aceleración de la transformación agrícola y el desarrollo rural sostenible, ampliación de las inversiones para transformación de los sistemas agroalimentarios. Para acelerar las mejoras propuestas en el marco estratégico, se prestará especial atención en la cooperación de la FAO, al desarrollo de tecnología, el fomento de la innovación, la amplia gestión de datos y el fortalecimiento de la gobernanza del sector agroalimentario, del capital humano y de las instituciones. Como temas transversales serán abordados la igualdad de género, la juventud y la inclusión. Como lo ha señalado el director general de la FAO, Xu Dongyu, creemos firmemente que la alimentación y la agricultura son la clave para lograr la Agenda 2030 para el desarrollo sostenible, y que la agricultura, en particular, es el instrumento más inclusivo para poner fin a la pobreza y lograr que todas las personas gocen de seguridad alimentaria. Estamos convencidos de que con este marco estratégico, los conocimientos especializados únicos y la abundancia de experiencia en materia de desarrollo sostenible, la FAO está bien situada para ayudar a todos los países a lograr los objetivos de la Agenda 2030, sin dejar a nadie atrás.
Innovación y agricultura digital. El sistema alimentario enfrenta desafíos sin precedentes. El mundo está cambiando a un ritmo acelerado debido a la aparición de una enorme variedad de nuevas tecnologías. La FAO ha asumido el desafío de aprovechar la revolución tecnológica en curso para transformar los sistemas alimentarios de América Latina y el Caribe, mejorar su eficiencia y sustentabilidad e impulsar la resiliencia de las comunidades, la agricultura y los ecosistemas al cambio climático. La innovación digital y tecnológica permitirá fomentar la inclusión social y crear oportunidades de empleo en los sistemas alimentarios, particularmente para la juventud rural. América Latina y el Caribe tiene una gran oportunidad para lograr resultados innovadores, tangibles y a gran escala en todos estos frentes. Para aprovecharla, la región necesita desarrollar rápidamente una hoja de ruta de innovación y digitalización de su alimentación y agricultura. La FAO en la región propone centrar su actuar en innovación en 3 grandes prioridades, junto a los países miembros y múltiples socios. La primera es transformar los sistemas alimentarios para lograr dietas saludables para todos, aumentando de manera sostenible la productividad de alimentos frescos y saludables, promoviendo la agricultura sensible a la nutrición al alcance de toda la población, impulsando el comercio electrónico de alimentos frescos y saludables para toda la población, especialmente para los más pobres y vulnerables, y modernizando los centros de suministro y las tiendas minoristas tradicionales gracias a la digitalización. La segunda prioridad es avanzar mano en mano hacia sociedades rurales más prósperas e incluyentes mediante la innovación y la digitalización, promoviendo el cambio tecnológico en los sistemas alimentarios para aumentar la productividad de los empleos rurales, agrícolas y no agrícolas, fomentando la innovación climáticamente inteligente en la producción de alimentos y estimulando el desarrollo territorial en los lugares con altos índices de pobreza e inseguridad alimentaria. La tercera prioridad regional es impulsar una agricultura sostenible y climáticamente resiliente, reduciendo la huella ambiental de la agricultura y los sistemas alimentarios mediante un uso más eficiente de los recursos naturales, conservando la biodiversidad y los servicios ecosistémicos, adaptando la agricultura al cambio climático y reduciendo el riesgo de desastres, e incrementando la eficiencia del uso del agua de la agricultura, el manejo sostenible de la pesca y la gestión y restauración de suelos mediante tecnologías digitales. Llevar adelante este programa de innovaciones tecnológicas, tanto biológicas como digitales, requiere un nuevo entorno político e institucional que garantice que sean adoptadas por la agricultura familiar, la pesca artesanal y por la pequeña y mediana empresa rural, para que se traduzcan en beneficios directos para los sectores vulnerables. Lograrlo significará crear nuevos mecanismos de financiación e inversión e innovaciones institucionales para que los países desarrollen políticas para la ciencia y la seguridad y aumenten sus inversiones públicas en investigación y sus asociaciones a nivel nacional y regional para abordar el desafío de la innovación y la digitalización multilateralmente. La FAO ha creado un nuevo Consejo Digital Internacional para la Alimentación y la Agricultura, que mejorará la cooperación internacional y el intercambio de ideas y experiencias, creando sinergias y evitando la duplicación de esfuerzos. Este consejo se mantendrá al día de los rápidos desarrollos en digitalización, trabajando con nuevas herramientas digitales y con expertos y expertas del más alto nivel. Proporcionará recomendaciones y estrategias de digitalización agrícola a actores gubernamentales y no gubernamentales y fortalecerá la cooperación internacional en los sistemas alimentarios para identificar los desafíos y las posibles soluciones. Todos estamos conscientes de la revolución científica y tecnológica que avanza a nuestro alrededor y de la necesidad que tenemos de reconstruir mejor luego del impacto de la pandemia de COVID-19. Nuestra agricultura, nuestros sistemas alimentarios y nuestras sociedades rurales deben abrazarla y ser parte de ella, como una condición indispensable de su crecimiento y desarrollo en el siglo XXI. FAO asume el compromiso de ser parte de esta tarea.
La agricultura familiar para mí es armonía.
Es pasión.
Es vida.
Es el trabajo asociativo.
La agricultura familiar es un estilo de vida.
La agricultura familiar, sin duda alguna, es el modo de vida para muchísimas familias de nuestro país. Sigue siendo el pilar de la producción.
Buscando la integración con la inclusión del género y la inclusión de jóvenes.
Nosotros nacemos como una huerta familiar, en donde yo me preocupo porque mis hijos, mi esposo y yo comamos algo que realmente sabemos de dónde viene.
Bueno, en la actividad productiva de agricultura familiar está involucrado todo el núcleo familiar.
Tengo un hijo que ya estudió, que ya se preparó y él sabe de innovación y él me da las pautas a seguir. Y lo que contaba mi esposo lo hace.
Aquí es donde se involucra ya la mano de obra de mi esposo, de mi hijo mayor, que él nos ayuda en todo lo que es la parte de desarrollo de máquinas, y la parte de mi hermana es fundamental con lo que es la distribución de las rutas.
Es no solo la que puede ahora y a futuro sostener la parte alimenticia de la población, sino también seguir siendo la base de la democracia costarricense.
La verdadera agricultura familiar es la distribución de la tierra, la distribución de la riqueza y la generación de riqueza a través de los procesos productivos que en este país hemos venido implementando históricamente.
Es una oportunidad de negocio bastante fuerte en el cual se nos pueden presentar varios escenarios de comercio, y con respecto a lo que es todos los pagos, facturación y todo esto, el PAI es muy ordenado.
Lo que se busca es que las familias puedan generar sus ingresos, su producción, e inclusive en algunas ocasiones ir más allá, industrializándolo.
Si uno empieza a enseñarle esto a los niños desde pequeñitos, ya como que planta la semillita en el cerebro de ellos.
Yo tengo una hija que ya ella está exportando, que ella es mi relevo generacional en el área del microlote de café para exportación.
Yo pienso que en el futuro, simplemente cambiamos nuestra forma de pensar en este modelo que tenemos de agricultura en Latinoamérica, podemos ver que los campesinos y los agricultores pueden surgir porque tienen muchísimo potencial.
Los jóvenes van a tener que ver para abajo para ver la agricultura y hacerla exitosa.
La tecnología viene a desarrollarnos, a darnos más fuerza. El desarrollo, la velocidad con la que se produce es otro nivel.
Lo que tenemos que hacer es capacitar a nuestros productores para que puedan accesarla. ¿Qué es lo que tenemos que hacer? Por medio de las instituciones del Estado, capacitar al personal, darle acceso a banda ancha a donde está la infraestructura del productor para que él pueda utilizarla.
Naciones Unidas para la Alimentación y la Agricultura, FAO, apunta a ser una institución aún más dinámica en aras de un mundo mejor, que brinde una cooperación técnica sistémica e integral, basada en los nuevos retos que presenta la Agenda 2030 para el Desarrollo Sostenible. La cooperación técnica de la FAO será guiada por el Marco Estratégico para el periodo 2022 al 2031, que se basa en el impulso y las transformaciones al interior de la organización, en particular, las innovaciones institucionales, un nuevo modelo de gestión y una serie de actividades emblemáticas como la iniciativa Mano de la Mano, la digitalización de la agricultura, el impulso a la ciencia y la tecnología aplicada al sector agrícola, el uso de sistemas globales de información abiertos y la transformación de los sistemas agroalimentarios para ser más eficientes, inclusivos, resilientes y sostenibles. De esa forma, pretende contribuir a que los países alcancen todos los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible y, de manera especial, el ODS 1, fin de la pobreza, el ODS 2, hambre cero, el ODS 10, reducción de las desigualdades. El marco estratégico de la FAO plantea 4 mejoras que cuentan con 20 esferas programáticas prioritarias. Una mejor producción, que pretende garantizar modalidades de consumo y producción sostenibles, para lo cual se trabaja en estas esferas programáticas. Innovación verde, para la creación de oportunidades empresariales y comerciales verdes, integradas, que incluyen a los pequeños productores. Transformación azul, para promover sistemas alimentarios acuícolas. Fortalecimiento del concepto de una salud, integrando los sistemas de salud humana y animal. Acceso equitativo de los pequeños productores a los recursos productivos. y agricultura digital con intención de integrar tecnologías accesibles. Una mejor nutrición para enfocar sus esfuerzos en promover dietas saludables para todos, nutrición para las personas más vulnerables, alimentos inocuos para todos, reducción de la pérdida y el desperdicio de alimentos y mercados y comercio transparentes con mayor participación. Un mejor medio ambiente con programas fortalecidos en sistemas agroalimentarios que mitigan los efectos del cambio climático, bioeconomía para la alimentación y la agricultura sostenibles y servicios ecosistémicos y biodiversidad en favor de la alimentación y la agricultura, y una vida mejor para todos, con igualdad de género y empoderamiento de las mujeres del medio rural, transformación rural inclusiva, sistemas alimentarios urbanos sostenibles, preparación y respuesta a emergencias agrícolas y sanitarias, sistemas agroalimentarios resilientes, iniciativa Mano de la Mano para la aceleración de la transformación agrícola y el desarrollo rural sostenible, ampliación de las inversiones para transformación de los sistemas agroalimentarios. Para acelerar las mejoras propuestas en el marco estratégico, se prestará especial atención en la cooperación de la FAO, al desarrollo de tecnología, el fomento de la innovación, la amplia gestión de datos y el fortalecimiento de la gobernanza del sector agroalimentario, del capital humano y de las instituciones. Como temas transversales serán abordados la igualdad de género, la juventud y la inclusión. Como lo ha señalado el director general de la FAO, Xu Dongyu, creemos firmemente que la alimentación y la agricultura son la clave para lograr la Agenda 2030 para el desarrollo sostenible y que la agricultura, en particular, es el instrumento más inclusivo para poner fin a la pobreza y lograr que todas las personas gocen de seguridad alimentaria. Estamos convencidos de que con este marco estratégico, los conocimientos especializados únicos y la abundancia de experiencia en materia de desarrollo sostenible, la FAO está bien situada para ayudar a todos los países a lograr los objetivos de la Agenda 2030, sin dejar a nadie atrás.
Innovación y agricultura digital. El sistema alimentario enfrenta desafíos sin precedentes. El mundo está cambiando a un ritmo acelerado debido a la aparición de una enorme variedad de nuevas tecnologías. La FAO ha asumido el desafío de aprovechar la revolución tecnológica en curso para transformar los sistemas alimentarios de América Latina y el Caribe, mejorar su eficiencia y sustentabilidad e impulsar la resiliencia de las comunidades, la agricultura y los ecosistemas al cambio climático. La innovación digital y tecnológica permitirá fomentar la inclusión social y crear oportunidades de empleo en los sistemas alimentarios, particularmente para la juventud rural. América Latina y el Caribe tiene una gran oportunidad para lograr resultados innovadores, tangibles y a gran escala en todos estos frentes. Para aprovecharla, la región necesita desarrollar rápidamente una hoja de ruta de innovación y digitalización de su alimentación y agricultura. La FAO en la región propone centrar su actuar en innovación en 3 grandes prioridades, junto a los países miembros y múltiples socios. La primera es transformar los sistemas alimentarios para lograr dietas saludables para todos, aumentando de manera sostenible la productividad de alimentos frescos y saludables, promoviendo la agricultura sensible a la nutrición al alcance de toda la población, impulsando el comercio electrónico de alimentos frescos y saludables para toda la población, especialmente para los más pobres y vulnerables, y modernizando los centros de suministro y las tiendas minoristas tradicionales gracias a la digitalización. La segunda prioridad es avanzar mano en mano hacia sociedades rurales más prósperas e incluyentes mediante la innovación y la digitalización, promoviendo el cambio tecnológico en los sistemas alimentarios para aumentar la productividad de los empleos rurales, agrícolas y no agrícolas, fomentando la innovación climáticamente inteligente en la producción de alimentos y estimulando el desarrollo territorial en los lugares con altos índices de pobreza e inseguridad alimentaria. La tercera prioridad regional es impulsar una agricultura sostenible y climáticamente resiliente, reduciendo la huella ambiental de la agricultura y los sistemas alimentarios mediante un uso más eficiente de los recursos naturales, conservando la biodiversidad y los servicios ecosistémicos, adaptando la agricultura al cambio climático y reduciendo el riesgo de desastres, e incrementando la eficiencia del uso del agua de la agricultura, el manejo sostenible de la pesca y la gestión y restauración de suelos mediante tecnologías digitales. Llevar adelante este programa de innovaciones tecnológicas, tanto biológicas como digitales, requiere un nuevo entorno político e institucional que garantice que sean adoptadas por la agricultura familiar, la pesca artesanal y por la pequeña y mediana empresa rural, para que se traduzcan en beneficios directos para los sectores vulnerables. Lograrlo significará crear nuevos mecanismos de financiación e inversión e innovaciones institucionales para que los países desarrollen políticas para la ciencia y la tecnología, mejoren su bioseguridad y aumenten sus inversiones públicas en investigación y sus asociaciones a nivel nacional y regional para abordar el desafío de la innovación y la digitalización multilateralmente. La FAO ha creado un nuevo Consejo Digital Internacional para la Alimentación y la Agricultura, que mejorará la cooperación internacional y el intercambio de ideas y experiencias, creando sinergias y evitando la duplicación de esfuerzos. Este consejo se mantendrá al día de los rápidos desarrollos en digitalización, trabajando con nuevas herramientas digitales y con expertos y expertas del más alto nivel. Proporcionará recomendaciones y estrategias de digitalización agrícola a actores gubernamentales y no gubernamentales y fortalecerá la cooperación internacional en los sistemas alimentarios para identificar los desafíos y las posibles soluciones. Todos estamos conscientes de la revolución científica y tecnológica que avanza a nuestro alrededor y de la necesidad que tenemos de reconstruir mejor luego del impacto de la pandemia de COVID-19. Nuestra agricultura, nuestros sistemas alimentarios y nuestras sociedades rurales deben abrazarla y ser parte de ella, como una condición indispensable de su crecimiento y desarrollo en el siglo XXI. FAO asume el compromiso de ser parte de esta tarea.
La agricultura familiar para mí es armonía.
Es pasión.
Es vida.
Es el trabajo asociativo.
La agricultura familiar es un estilo de vida.
La agricultura familiar, sin duda alguna, es el modo de vida para muchísimas familias de nuestro país. Sigue siendo el pilar de la producción.
Buscando la integración con la inclusión del género y la inclusión de jóvenes.
Nosotros nacemos como una huerta familiar, en donde yo me preocupo porque mis hijos, mi esposo y yo comamos algo que realmente sabemos de dónde viene.
Bueno, en la actividad productiva de agricultura familiar está involucrado todo el núcleo familiar.
Tengo un hijo que ya estudió, que ya se preparó y él sabe de innovación y él me da las pautas a seguir. Y lo que contaba mi esposo lo hace.
Aquí es donde se involucra ya la mano de obra de mi esposo, de mi hijo mayor, que él nos ayuda en todo lo que es la parte de desarrollo de máquinas, y la parte de mi hermana es fundamental con lo que es la distribución de las rutas.
Es no solo la que puede ahora y a futuro sostener la parte alimenticia de la población, sino también seguir siendo la base de la democracia costarricense.
La verdadera agricultura familiar es la distribución de la tierra, la distribución de la riqueza y la generación de riqueza a través de los procesos productivos que en este país hemos venido implementando históricamente.
PAI es una oportunidad de negocio bastante fuerte en el cual se nos pueden presentar varios escenarios de comercio, y con respecto a lo que es todos los pagos, facturación y todo esto, el PAI es muy ordenado.
Lo que se busca es que las familias puedan generar sus ingresos, su producción, e inclusive en algunas ocasiones ir más allá, industrializándolo.
Si uno empieza a enseñarle esto a los niños desde pequeñitos, ya como que planta la semillita en el cerebro de ellos.
Yo tengo una hija que ya ella está exportando, que ella es mi relevo generacional en el área del microlote de café para exportación.
Yo pienso que en el futuro, simplemente cambiamos nuestra forma de pensar en este modelo que tenemos de agricultura en Latinoamérica, podemos ver que los campesinos y los agricultores pueden surgir porque tienen muchísimo potencial.
Los jóvenes van a tener que ver para abajo para ver la agricultura y hacerla exitosa.
La tecnología viene a desarrollarnos, a darnos más fuerza. El desarrollo, la velocidad con la que se produce es otro nivel.
Lo que tenemos que hacer es capacitar a nuestros productores para que puedan accesarla. ¿Qué es lo que tenemos que hacer? Por medio de las instituciones del Estado, capacitar al personal, darle acceso a banda ancha a donde está la infraestructura del productor para que él pueda utilizarla.
Naciones Unidas para la Alimentación y la Agricultura, FAO, apunta a ser una institución aún más dinámica en aras de un mundo mejor, que brinde una cooperación técnica sistémica e integral, basada en los nuevos retos que presenta la Agenda 2030 para el Desarrollo Sostenible. La cooperación técnica de la FAO será guiada por el Marco Estratégico para el periodo 2022 al 2031, que se basa en el impulso y las transformaciones al interior de la organización, en particular las innovaciones institucionales, un nuevo modelo de gestión y una serie de actividades emblemáticas como la iniciativa Mano de la Mano, la digitalización de la agricultura, el impulso a la ciencia y la tecnología aplicada al sector agrícola, el uso de sistemas globales de información abiertos y la transformación de los sistemas agroalimentarios para ser más eficientes, inclusivos, resilientes y sostenibles. De esa forma, pretende contribuir a que los países alcancen todos los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible y, de manera especial, el ODS 1, fin de la pobreza, el ODS 2, hambre cero, el ODS 10, reducción de las desigualdades. El marco estratégico de la FAO plantea 4 mejoras que cuentan con 20 esferas programáticas prioritarias. Una mejor producción, que pretende garantizar modalidades de consumo y producción sostenibles, para lo cual se trabaja en estas esferas programáticas. Innovación verde, para la creación de oportunidades empresariales y comerciales verdes, integradas, que incluyen a los pequeños productores. Transformación azul, para promover sistemas alimentarios acuícolas. Fortalecimiento del concepto de una salud, integrando los sistemas de salud.
Sorry, asignamos.
Buenas tardes con todos y todas. Volvemos a encontrarnos en esta sala
Good
plenaria.
afternoon. We here are in the plenary session again. In my room, the exchange was very interesting. And as one of the commenters were expressing, it is revitalizing to hear all these positive programs that are not only inspiring, but also transforming. We have seen amazing effects in the life of women, young people in the region. It is really very, very interesting. And I want to thank the colleagues that have been presented here and many exchanges on how the other rooms worked. All of them will be in the web so that you can see them later. For those that you are not able to participate, and I would like to congratulate the colleagues from the management improvement because they have really had a very good activity. This is our third and last block of this very first FAO Transforms Fair. In this very first session, we will be hearing about the first findings of a study that is being finished. This study looked to identify from the perspective of the different partners the critical knowledge that FAO has in terms of innovation. The result of this study will be presented by Javier Martinez. Javier is a specialist in knowledge management, member of the Consultant Knowledge Works. I would like to mention that throughout his presentation, we will have some small surveys to be able to obtain your comments. Javier, you have been acknowledged. You have 25 minutes so that you can leave some time for questions and comments that probably we will have after your presentation. Thank you very much, Carolina. It is a pleasure being here. Thank you for this introduction. And we will be taking the best use of this time. I am not allowed to share the presentation. Let me share my screen. Human error, as always. I understand that you can see my presentation, yes? As Carolina was mentioning, we were invited to identify the critical knowledge of FAO in the area of innovation and from the perspective of the partners. As you can see, that is not a minor challenge. I am representing myself. My name is Javier Martinez. I was born when pictures were black and white and we had to take them to a lab. I am Spanish and I've lived for 20 years in Chile. And my partner with whom we did this work is Francisco Espinosa. He is even before my time, so it's not even black and white, it's sepia. And as we were mentioning, by the end of the year, at the beginning of this year, we received a request to cooperate and identify critical knowledge of FAO from the perspective of the partners in the area of innovation. And this considers a number of challenges because those organizations that work in this exercise work from inside and not from the outside perspective. What I would like to share then is, and what we will be showing here today, is just a small summary of a very first exploratory study that needs, of course, to delve into more samples and others. But we would like to share the main conclusions that we have obtained. There is more detailed information if anybody would like to read it, but here it's the main conclusions. And what we did, thanks to the fact that our participants were able to participate, we interviewed a number of partners of FAO representing governments, international organizations, the academia, civil society, and the private sector. The rest of the information that we will be sharing comes from these sessions. And this was a methodological challenges. The first one is that not everybody understands what innovation is. Even though we use this word very often, each person, each organization, each institution has their own concept, even though FAO has been working for a number of years and there is a first quote unquote definition, considering innovation as a change process, a change that can be in design, production, or of goods and services, but also changes in the environment. Therefore, it generates new context by doing new activities or combining old with new by providing a new support to something that already exists. And each of the participants had their own perspective and their own story. And also, of course, what we find is partners from very different areas, categories, and perspectives. Each one of them had a different approach and a relationship with FAO and innovation that was completely different. And to harmonize all these different perspectives is not an easy task. Now, the first thing I would like to do is to share simple definitions when we talk about knowledge and critical knowledge. Same thing happens with innovation. And I have an example for those of you who will be able, some of you will be able to understand. If we ask ourselves, which is the element that influences in what an individual does is knowledge. And this is an example. This is the world record to solve the Cubic cube. It's 4.2 seconds. So when we ask ourselves between the difference between that person and the rest of us, the cube is exactly the same one that we will use. They don't have more hands, more eyes, or any difficult characteristics compared to us. He is able to do it in 4.2 seconds because his knowledge or their knowledge is different to what we have. So even though it seems many times it is confused, what's not important is the knowledge that we have. As a matter of fact, we have too much information, but it's how to react or act with that information. Information is outside and knowledge is inside. If, for example, I do not know about the molecule of water, or I cannot read, that information is worthless. Thus, the first thing that stands out is we believe that nothing is more important than knowledge. And I have a small and old view with an example that many of you probably know of. No way, no. We will have to look for a mechanic. I am here. This is being here on time. Well, you're on a timely basis here. Okay, start the engine. Well, that is great. Do I owe you something? 20 euros. Come on, 20 just to turn on. No, it's 20 euros just to be able to know what to tighten up. To apply knowledge, what is worth here is the amount of time that we have to dedicate to have that process, how many hours we need to learn and apply knowledge. So what do we understand by knowledge? Knowledge is the experience that allows to make decisions and act upon it, something that you can do and decide upon because you learned it. So knowledge is action. It's not what you do, it's something you have. It's something you apply. Therefore, the more knowledge you have, better are your results. And this is why it is so important to ensure that people have knowledge needed whenever needed. Can you pilot this? Not yet. Operator, I need a course for B-12 helicopter piloting. So to provide is an advantage, it's a competitive advantage. Okay, let's go. And this is what we believe it happens many times. This is the hope that we have to be able to use knowledge when there's something I can't solve. And we provide people with it. And when they have knowledge, they have an advantage. They can do something they could not. So what do we understand with critical knowledge? Well, of course, we have the ISO 30401 explanation, and their first paragraph says that the organizations have to identify, assess, and establish priorities of the knowledges, of the domains of knowledge And ISO says that if we have to start somewhere, we have to establish priorities. And I would like to share an experience of an organization that is your parent company, which is the IAA. And it's a webinar where we have participated. And one of the speakers before us was the person in charge of NASA that named his participation why an organization should identify critical knowledge. And out of the many things that he shared, there are two messages that are very important. The first one is this is scientific, technological, and knowledge organization. Knowledge is the main asset or major asset. And what they were saying is the loss of this asset will generate impact costs at the safety level, cost, reputation, and others. So we have to manage this asset in a planned manner and structured manner. So the question is whether all knowledge can be managed. Our response is that the best thing we can do is we do not have time and resources to manage everything. Not everything is as important. We have to identify the most important knowledge, and on this, we have to define a plan to be able to manage it and be proactive. So what do we understand by critical knowledge? On one hand, is the one that is really holding or supporting your comparative advantage. And this is what knowledge means. And critical knowledge is the one that has more impact, that influences more in you obtaining your goals, or that contributes to the results that you're obtaining. And of course, it means that you first have to define which are the goals you want to reach. So if you ask anybody in any organization, which is the most important knowledge within your organization and why, in general, this is how people react. People are not used to hearing this question, therefore they do not have a response. It's not that that knowledge does not exist, it's not identified. By the midst of 2019, nobody thought that the knowledge on epidemiology, on how to stop a pandemic would be important. And 6 months later, this knowledge became a critical knowledge. Therefore, not knowing about this critical knowledge, or considering this metaphor in health, is not knowing which are your main organs, how they are doing, and what you should do with them. So when we carried out the interviews with the partners, basically we asked three things. The first one was which is the main innovation that you acknowledge in FAO? The second question is, which do you believe is the critical knowledge that explains and supports that innovation, the one that the FAO has nowadays and that you believe FAO should have in the future? And we asked them to describe critical knowledge, to express it in a very specific way. We asked them to express it in an active verb, followed by a what, which is the area where this is applied, and what for, which is the goal we're doing. And an example is, it's necessary to know, which is the verb is implement, what programs in small producers, what for the reduction of the GHG gases. And of course, we were very strict here because we tried to obtain definitions that were as homogeneous as possible. And when we obtained this, we asked them to assess which is the this area, and based on 5 criteria for the current knowledge, what we requested was, is this knowledge will continue being critical in the next 3 to 5 years? Is this a knowledge that belongs to FAO or is provided by others? Third, is this knowledge well distributed within FAO, meaning that everybody that should have it have it? The fourth criteria is this a complex knowledge that takes too much time, too much effort to learn? And the first criteria was, is this a stable knowledge that changes very little, or it is always being modified? And for the future knowledge, we are modifying future. So we asked, instead of property, is this a mature knowledge that already exists, or is just starting? And the second criteria was, instead of distribution, which is the level of urgency? Do you believe that FAO has to develop this? And we will be sharing 2 findings. And as I'm saying, there are many different activities. The first one is that for partners, FAO is an innovative company. In all the interviews, when we asked, which is the innovation in FAO, nobody from their perspective, where they did have no problems to see this. We're in a different logic. So this does not mean that if the organization is innovating, the organization is innovative.
It means that there was a recognition that one of the things FAO did really well was to harness and apply things that did exist, in this case with its partners. So FAO was not seen so much as a generator of innovations, but they did get good points for adapting and tailoring innovations to other situations. And where we also see the FAO as is an innovator in developing work methodologies and contributing knowledge that may come from other spheres. Looking at work methodologies, FAO is a producer of knowledge and a generator of knowledge. So that would be FAO knowledge that tends to come from its own resources. The fourth thing that we found when we looked at the findings was that the closer the partner was to the field, then more concrete the innovation is, more logically, and more specific the knowledge resulting from it. And as partners move through the field, that innovation, as they move further away, could become a little bit more abstract. So if we have to think about government partners and academia, what do they most value? The type of knowledge that they're most worried about? A strategic vision of their territory, that capacity to create connections and bonds and ties with stakeholders in the system, and also contributing to public policy design. So that's the standpoint that we're seeing government actors and academia working with. If you look at the perspective of partners who are often from the private sector or working on specific projects, the types of knowledge that appear are a little bit more specific. What they recognize from FAO is the ability to structure, design plans and programs and implement projects and programs on the ground in accordance with the profile of the partner as needed, analyze market information, or do training in technical aspects. So technical training and capacity building. So you can see the perspectives are vastly different in nature, depending on who you ask. So as Carolina told you before, we're going to ask you some questions now. So I'm going to ask you a survey question. Let's put it on the screen. I'm going to read out the question, and then you'll have a chance to answer if you're on Zoom. But if you're on streaming, just think about the question. So here's our survey. Question 1. In what spheres do you think FAO is most innovative? So this is you. What do you think FAO is most innovative in? And you can only pick one. So technology, introducing, adapting, or using it. The institutional sphere, new rules and ways of organizing social relations. Social, new ideas to meet social needs. Policies, including processes, tools, and novel practices. Finance, creating additional funding sources. Sustainable agriculture approaches tied to economic, ecological, and social processes, or other areas that may not be related to any of the 6 above. So the question again is, in what sphere do you think FAO is most innovative? And pick one of the answer. There's 6 choices, and the last one is other. I hope you are all enabled to vote. And once we start getting some results coming in, then we'll share them with you. We'll see if the answers are similar or not. Can everybody vote? Maybe. There we go. Well, there's a very clear winner. We're seeing sustainable agriculture. We can't see the whole screen at one time. Nobody said finance. A little bit in social and institutional, but pretty strong response for policy. So we're seeing that sustainable agricultural approach won. So we're going to close that and keep going. And I'm going to share, when we look at those results, depending on the people that we're asking, we tend to get three areas: technology, environment, which is an important thing, and methodologies. When we look at technology, it can include a lot of different things. We're seeing a lot of FAO's capacity to coordinate and bring together technological knowledge that maybe was not developed by FAO, but they haven't yet been translated and adapted into the realities where FAO comes in and says, well, here's where we can use them. We've seen that especially during the pandemic, much of the work being done. FAO's ability to rapidly supply to meet challenges. And we also see that FAO is perceived as a good manager of knowledge, knowledge that is capable of showing the possibilities, that if maybe me as a partner, I can't see those possibilities, FAO can show them to me. And the eighth thing we see is FAO as a supplier of knowledge and just a recognition of the current and future value of FAO as a source and provider of knowledge. So that would be important to look at: methodologies, work methodologies, etc. FAO is seen that way. Another conclusions that we could take away from this research is that FAO is valued for its ability to establish connections, to build connections. One of the abilities of the future is empathy. Actually, Google says empathy is the skill of the future. And partners see FAO acting with empathy, the ability to understand and converse and talk and translate that into stronger relationships beyond just technical skills. So the areas where partners most value FAO is coordinating, articulating, and dialoguing with different stakeholders and groups of people. And that capacity to coordinate and listen and communicate is really, really valued. In parallel to that, and this is related as well, FAO is recognized as an actor that knows its territory, and that's why it's capable of coordinating among stakeholders, because it knows its territory, it knows that, and it's the result of the work that it does. And of course, we value participatory methodologies. FAO always uses participatory methodologies and reaches solutions that reflect joint work and consensus. I think that's clearly seen as one of the most valued things from FAO. An element that is critical and we've heard from practically everyone, and I think it's almost a matter of survival, is all of the knowledge that's critical today will it continue to be critical in the next 3 to 5 years? And that's important for us to understand. Is the knowledge that we're focusing on today going to be essential in 3 to 5 years? Because what's going to be important in 3 to 5 years has to be even more important today. I'm going to do my final survey question, and then we are going to do the quick Q&A. Here's our next question. It's more about the future. In what areas do you think FAO should focus its innovation efforts on in the future? So it's the exact same 7 options. Please only choose one. If you had to only pick one, where do you think FAO should focus its innovation efforts on in the future? So same thing, pick your answer and we'll see the results. We've chosen that you can only have one answer, so you can only pick one. Pick your top priority. And then we'll see the results and talk about them. Just gonna leave it for a few seconds and then we'll share the results. I know I'm reaching the end of my time. We're seeing a lot of diversity of answers. All right, we'll find the results now. Yeah, it's a little bit more scattered. Technology gets more support, which is interesting, especially in the time of a pandemic. Agricultural approaches continue, sustainable agricultural approaches continues to take a cake. Institutional a little bit smaller. So it's quite scattered, but yeah, focus on agriculture. And this confirms what we believe is the most important to be focusing innovation on in the future. Well, that's it. So when we ask ourselves a question like this, what knowledge do we think the FAO needs to develop urgently from the partners? The answers were continue working on the institutional side, relationship building. And this is something we've been hearing over and over. Linking up, connecting with industry, private sector, productive sector, civil society, and also partnerships with regional and extra-regional partners who might have more specialized capacities and put together that coordination, which really leverages the abilities. And what we've also heard really strongly, keep sharing information and knowledge among partners. Keep doing outreach, keep sharing information. This is basically what FAO is fantastic at doing. If we keep sharing information, if we keep exchanging practices, knowledge, that work of generating knowledge and sharing that knowledge brings so many other stakeholders under the umbrella. And I think it can almost be like the principal source of knowledge and passing on knowledge. So I'm going to leave you with a metaphor. Life is like a Rubik's Cube. We say that our life is like a series of Rubik's Cubes. And you might solve the cube today, but the reality is going to change the cube tomorrow. A social crisis, a war, a pandemic, a new technology, a disruption, a new government, a new administration. No matter how many Rubik's Cubes you figure out how to solve, you're going to have to learn how to solve a new Rubik's Cube tomorrow. So the best way to have knowledge is to prepare. And we think what's most important is to prepare with knowledge for the future. Knowledge mapping is also very important. What knowledge do we have today? What knowledge are we going to need? And what should we need for the future? And what should we learn? I hope I've stayed to the time that Carolina asked, and it's a pleasure to have been here.
Thank you very much, Javier. Very interesting and a lot of fun, as a matter of fact. We have around 20-25 minutes for questions, comments. If you want to send them through the chat, or if you would rather raise your hand, for those of you in the Zoom, please go ahead. I think that in this exercise with Javier and Francisco, one of the most important challenges was to ask those questions without knowing FAO from the inside, and that really helps to hear all of our partners in a very open fashion and to bring these interesting conclusions. I think that much that has been presented is what many of us suspected, and these will be the responses that we want, and the things that are also making differences between the subregions or others, and that depending on the origin of the partners was interesting. I don't know if anybody has a comment or a question. Do you want to raise your hand, or do you want me to read the question in the chat? Daniela Rojas is asking, how do you believe final assessment of the project would be useful to understand which has been the critical knowledge for each of the projects that have been carried out by FAO? We have an assessment process, a final assessment process of projects, and sometimes we feel that we do not use these results as much, and there could be a possibility to extract some lessons learned or critical knowledge. While we wait for other questions, Javier, Francisco, would you like to respond? Yes, let me tell you a story. I hope you like stories. It's a story of FAO. A number of years ago, we participated in a small project in a program, and what was requested was to obtain the knowledge of the projects once they were over. The participants would leave, and that generated knowledge in the project was lost. There was something that maybe could be in reports, but what we did was to work so each of the projects, as it was over, would generate a case that later on would become learning material. Therefore, projects are a potential basis for knowledge. If you ask yourself something and then you obtain it, if you consider the design, which will be the knowledge that will be used throughout the project, and you incorporate different instances to think and capture the process, by the end, you not only present a project, but also the knowledge that was used and generated. But you have to incorporate it as a permanent question from the very beginning, so that by the end we can really obtain this other information. Thank you. Matias Ruiz is asking us whether we have also interviewed donors to identify critical knowledge of donors. I think that would be a very interesting exercise for us. And Hector Vasquez is sending a very interesting knowledge about supplies. And Julio Verdeguer, our director, is asking whether critical knowledge that we have or that our partners express that we have is the one that FAO really needs to fulfill these strategic goals more than just a specific project. And there was a comment by Mariana Delgadillo saying, even though the pandemic has weakened itself, which is the scope or how it has affected the projects? Is there an emergency plan for similar situations in the future? Have we learned? Have we generated any type of knowledge during the pandemic to be better and to approach different challenges? Well, I have a number of observations, and Francisco, you can participate as well. What Julio is expressing is not only legitimate, but for us, it's a starting point. We always start from the goals that exist. because it is the only way that we have found to make a discussion objective. Otherwise, this last name that is critical is very risky because each one will have their own opinion, and the consensus is that we should work from something that we have agreed upon, which are the goals that we are carrying out with the project. And in this case, we did the exercise the other way around. We started from outside, and Mina, Magda, everybody knows about this. It took a long time to decide how to tackle it. We're not creating the map from FAO's goals, but rather, when doing an external exercise, we needed to look for a starting point in the conversation with the partners so that they could talk about critical knowledge. So Julio saying is the truth, and that would be the step that is needed if the map was created from the internal perspective, even though it would consider external later on. But one of the first conversations we had with the team. We have to start from the strategic goals, and then we would have to reach the goal that for today's strategic perspectives, these are the important aspects. And the idea was innovation here. And of course, there were cases where the partners say, it is hard for me to express myself because I really do not know in detail how FAO is operating internally to be able to express myself. Thank you, Javier. Yes, we always had this tension of starting to ask partners how they saw us from outside, or maybe to look inside and understand and identify critical knowledge from the organization itself, how it could express that it's a main asset. There is a question from Amanda saying, Javier, you work with many different organizations and analyze much of the knowledge of them. But I have a question, something that attracted your attention or stood out in your findings, something you were expecting, but that was different after the interviews? I would say yes. The sample is not a huge sample, of course, and that is why we would need to really delve into those ideas. But it really stood out, especially given situations that we have gone through, is that people, it's very hard for them to express themselves, even though they have the information in their head. Almost all of the interviewees were very fast in identifying innovation, knowledge, and to express them this way. And we were surprised because that process usually takes some time. It is not natural for people to express knowledge because even if it is clear in our head, to express it is something different. And then it also stood out to me that consensus that we had in terms of what FAO is well known for, that possibility of being a creator of organizations, coordinations, and organizations, and that knowledge that is acknowledged as a methodology surprised me because I really thought there would be far more dispersion in the different perspectives. Of course, there are specific activities, but that really stood out, meaning that partners are considering that I should receive a good score. They have clearly identified me in an area acknowledging this expertise. And I already know where I should be going because the partners are saying this is a critical aspect. There are two more comments. One is very important. Jose Garcia saying that FAO has many different information systems with data, portals, repositories. Many of these are online, but we do not really know where all of this information lies, how to use it, and what it is about. And the question is, should this mean that we should be more involved? Each representation, each office of FAO should make more efforts rather than just incubation in terms of knowledge to get to know about innovation, the recent story that was done in an office or this source of information. And a question by Dina asking about the different stakeholders that were interviewed. It's a small sample, of course, it's a qualitative work, but they come from different sectors, from the private sector, civil society, government, organizations, and others that were identified from a number of pre-selected countries, and also coming from interviews by the different organizations and recommendations of the national offices, as well as the group that is led by Duca. But how then do we promote all this information that exists so it becomes knowledge, Javier? What would you recommend? I think that's the dream of all organizations I know of, large or small, because the challenge is far more complicated. We have more information, not less. We don't even start wondering if it's trustworthy or not, but the possibility of generating information is really multiplying. And the Nielsen study was saying that we have an offer in digital platforms of 800,000 programs, and this is just for fun, and 20% more than the previous year. That at the same time, it's also a 20% larger than the previous year, and the offer is much larger every time. So I believe that we all have to be aware, it is my opinion, that our raw material that we work with is information knowledge, and our tool is our mind. These are our tools. And it forces us to be fully focused in what type of information and what for. Therefore, the goal here is to establish priorities and what is not worth using, and what I consider is a critical element to have it very well organized. And as it goes with everything in life, we have to be very organized and disciplined. The idea is to say what information, what for, where, what time, from what source, and then go through that exercise of organizing at the beginning and to establish priorities of who I will be working on, and to really consider that I will not be able to work on everything. That is the exercise we need. And as you're saying, these are the roles of what will be happening. It is kept in such and such a place. It is used in such a project. But as many other things, less is more. And the exercise is to decide what is a priority. The rest, just leave it, because otherwise we will really not be able to navigate. We will really sink. Thank you, Javier. Thank you very much. I can imagine that the speed under which you are speaking was a tremendous challenge for our interpreters, and I really hope you were able to deal with it. And yes, the management of knowledge, of establishing priorities, of being able to select those or choose those information sources that are feeding our knowledge and that our brain is able to transform and propose those ideas and new ways of doing is the most important challenge in our times. I would like to close this session here to be able to have some time for the closing on behalf of our regional representative, Julio Verdeguer, but I would like to first mention 5 important things that I am taking home from this morning. It was very fruitful. It was very interesting to see what we have in this institution. First of all, there is much area for innovation, to do new things, to build upon the experience and the knowledges that we have. But clearly enough, in the parallel rooms, in that presentation of behavioral economy and how our partners see us, there are 5 things that I believe are all very clear. One is the possibility to listen makes a difference. The capacity to listen to our teams, to our partners, to participants in different projects, to scientists and throughout the world, but also to hear ourselves among each other in terms of practices and what we work in. Two, the tremendous potential with new tools that are made available to closing gaps of the decrease of inequalities and poverty. There's a tremendous interesting possibility of using new tools from ways of doing all these activities, as it was mentioned by the science of knowledge and the use of technology, organization, and others, and thus provide service to populations that were not able to have it.
Third, the enormous potential in our rural territories of Latin America and in our groups of consumers to all make a small contribution, a small intervention, and develop and increase the potential of better lives and better contribution to personal, family, and community and territory development and national development. Fourth, bring it down to the local level. Territory, contextualize it, adapt it, tailor it to the characteristics, make it local, make it match each culture, each place, each set of conditions. And doing that requires an effort, but it makes the difference. And that's why we need to not just learn, but also adapt and scale out solutions. And five, none of this can be done alone. Partnerships, partnerships, partnerships. One of the most mentioned topics. It's almost like the cornerstone of the work that we do. It's what's really going to allow us to innovate and to consolidate this critical knowledge. Everything was really interesting to hear the parallel talks and the parallel sessions. When you've got time, go back, take a look at the videos available on the website, check out the tables that you weren't able to attend in real time. It's really valuable opportunities and contributions from our teams who presented and shared their experiences. This opportunity for sharing and exchanging and collaborating and dialoguing is a point of departure for us to continue improving the way we work and the tools we have to make them available to the region for better agri-food systems as a collective, rather than everyone having to do this problem by themselves. Before I ask Julio to speak, I want to thank our interpreters, of course, who have been with us today. Sol and the IT team from the regional team as well, Marcia, which has been with us, and Roxana, who helped us make all this happen, all of our moderators who were at each session, our support teams, our internal commenters, and from outside, everybody who's joined us to share your innovative experiences, and to the streamers as well. We had just in the past week, they came on board to help us make sure the streaming would work, and special appreciation to Mina and Ananda from the team from Science, Knowledge, and Innovation. So Julio Verdeguer, please go ahead, close out this final moment of FAO Transform. Thank you, Carolina. This first time of holding FAO Transform, and I really hope it's not just the only one. I hope that it's the first and there will be many others. It really exceeded my expectations. And my question is, what are we going to do with all of this? Because I think we truly, Carolina, and colleagues from the team have to figure out a way to harness what we've listened to. How can we capitalize on it? How can we take advantage of everything we've learned and gathered? I was in one of the modules. We've heard a lot of experiences. I wasn't able to hear all of the experiences. I hope to do so with the recordings in the upcoming days. But I know that there are a couple of things where I just could say, I know we need to do this way more widespread. We need to do this in way more places. So I'm taking home homework with me. We can't just leave it here. My second reflection was about the presentation from Javier. It's really interesting to hear all of that. But the important question for me is, what do we do with all of this that Javier has done for us? What does it imply for us? Where do we have to get stronger? Where do we have to be cautious? And where do we have to maybe say, here we have some gaps. Here we have some things we thought we were doing fine, and maybe we're not doing them so well. So we have to take it back with us. It would be a shame to have heard this magnificent presentation and to just leave it there. We have to act on it. And I think that's what's most important to me. It was great to be here at this fair, and it motivates me to act. What decisions can I make in the here and now as soon as possible so that this isn't just left at a beautiful day of presentations and it turns into actions? And I hope that all of the 1,800 people who they told me have participated in this streaming have learned something and take something home. But once again, whether it's a piece of knowledge or a lesson or whatever it is, I hope it helps you do something different starting tomorrow. This is a day for transformation. It wasn't a day of knowledge, it was a day of transformation. So thank you, huge thank you to everyone, appreciation to everyone, and I think Carolina has already offered her appreciation to the team. I join her in her words. And I want to thank her, Carolina Trivelli, for the role that she's played, as well as Mina. They have been our orchestral conductors. So thank you to all of our colleagues from the 18 teams who joined together for taking the time. I know it's hard to find a spot on your schedule. Everybody has a demanding schedule. Nobody has time. You know, our terms of reference say, it doesn't say necessarily you need to find time to sit down and reflect on what you're doing. Maybe they should, but we always need to find time to sit down and reflect about what we do. It was great to have a seminar to do that. Really, thank you for your generosity, for sharing your experiences, for sharing your know-how, for sharing your lessons with all of us. And it's our task now to turn that knowledge into better actions in many places. Thank you again. I can't say more thank you. A great opportunity, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Take care. I know the pandemic is still out there, so take care. Bye-bye and thank you. Bye, thank you.
Muchas gracias a todos por su participación. Muchas gracias al equipo. Gracias, Javier.
Thank you, Javier. Thank you to the team. Thank you to everyone for participating.